Chapter 422. In his anxiety, Tiger's Mane continued to say, "Young master, your health is more important. You should speak less." Cough, young master, I don't want to come out sick, but the bigger picture is more important. I really don't want to see any conflict between the mercenary army and the great Ming dynasty. Yang Qindong struggled to say these words and then he coughed heavily. "Okay, young master, we understand. We understand." They also heard it. Tiger's Mane nodded repeatedly, then suddenly turned around and looked at Guan Ying, Ma Wei and Wei Guang. He said, "You all heard it clearly. The Duke said that whoever did it should stand up. Don't implicate others and don't hurt the relationship between the mercenary army and the great Ming dynasty." Tiger's Mane's words made Guan Ying and the other two look at each other. At least Guan Ying and Ma Wei didn't want to have any conflicts with the mercenary army, especially when the King of Min's faction was so rampant and crazily expanding. This elite army might be of great use. However, they really didn't know where the missing mercenary soldiers went. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but we really don't know where the mercenary soldiers went. How do you want us to hand them over? Is there a misunderstanding?" Guan Ying said in a weak tone. "That's right. Is there some misunderstanding?" Ma Wei chimed in with an innocent look. "I think this must be a misunderstanding. You guys are just trying to frame someone. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, we respect your contributions to the Southern Ming dynasty, but you can't ignore us because of this. Let me tell you, this is disrespectful to the Southern Ming dynasty." Wei Guang opened his mouth and his tone was interrogative. His overbearing attitude was full of arrogance. Bang! Wei Guang, who was speaking, suddenly tilted his body, and then he half knelt on the ground. Then he clenched his teeth in pain and cold sweat poured down. A gunshot was fired. The one who fired the shot was naturally Yang Qindong. He didn't seem to like the noise, or maybe he was angry that the other party called him Duke of Loyalty and Courage instead of Duke of Loyalty and Courage. In short, he had fired the gun. When the gunshot rang out, Guan Ying and Ma Wei were shocked. Then they saw that the one who was shot was Wei Guang, and a stream of dark red blood was flowing out from his trousers. Their faces immediately changed. "Loyal Duke? What are you doing? Dare I ask, what did Wei Chan do to make you want to kill him?" It was Ma Wei who asked. Then Guan Ying also expressed his stance. "Duke Zhongdan, no matter what it is, we can sit down and have a good talk. If you do this, I really can't explain it to the higher-ups. You've caused trouble." Guan Ying and Ma Wei had such an attitude because of Wei Guang's noble status. They were members of the embroidered uniform guards, and even they had to be courteous to them. Secondly, he was also considered an official of the imperial court. If he attacked an official for no reason and did it in public, he would definitely be held accountable. Yang Qindong was no longer an imperial envoy. He no longer had the power to control the Southern Ming officials at any time. "Got into trouble?" "Yes, I did get into trouble, but it's not me, it's him." Yang Qindong's voice rang out again. "Tiger's Mane, have they arrived? Bring them up." "Yes," Tiger's Mane replied. He turned around and saw Chiovi lightly nodding. "Good, bring them up." Yang Qindong's calmness and Tiger's Mane's unhurried manner fell into the eyes of Guan Ying, Ma Wei and the kneeling Wei Guang, causing them to have a look of confusion. Only Ma Wei's heart involuntarily skipped a beat. Then he shook his head forcefully. It was impossible. The place where Lu Jian was imprisoned was very hidden. It was impossible to find him so quickly. Besides, he had already instructed Lu Si to silence him if things went wrong. What was there to be afraid of? It must be something else. Yes, it must be. Comforting himself, Wei Guang's expression became much calmer. When he raised his head again, he had already recovered his initial calmness. However, all of this calmness instantly crumbled when he saw the people being escorted in. Lu Si, who was wearing a turquoise brocade robe, was escorted out. At the same time, a few brocade guard brothers who had stayed behind to guard the courtyard were also escorted out. Wei Guang could even name these people. As soon as they appeared, he felt as if his head had been blown off. The person who was brought over was indeed Lu Si. Originally, his head had been lowered, thinking that he was definitely going to die. However, when he raised his head and saw Wei Guang, who was wearing a large red python robe, a flying fish robe, a black gauze hat, a belt around his waist and an embroidered spring saber at his waist, his originally dim and lifeless eyes instantly lit up. "Boss, save me, save me. They saved Lu Jian and killed a few of our brothers. Lu Xi's shouts continued, but at this time, everyone's gaze naturally fell on Wei Guang. Even Guan Ying and Ma Wei, who did not know what had happened before, understood at this moment what had happened. They also finally knew that someone had kidnapped the mercenary soldiers, and the mastermind behind this was Wei Guang. The soldiers were kidnapped. No wonder the mercenaries were so angry and mobilized so many people. At this moment, Guan Ying and Ma Wei seemed to understand the mercenaries' actions. However, their understanding was one thing, and they would definitely not express any opinions on this matter. The brocade guard was one of the most trusted subordinates of the emperor. How could others meddle with it? Even if they did something wrong, there would definitely be someone from above to vouch for them. It was not something that military officials of their level could interfere. Since they could not interfere, they could only stand aside and watch the show. From a certain point of view, Guan Ying and Ma Wei were even happy to see Wei Guang suffer. Shut up. Hearing that Lu Xi's shouts had no intention of stopping, Wei Guang endured the gunshot wound on his leg and yelled loudly. Then he looked at Yang Qindong in the luxurious carriage and said with a strong appearance, "That's right, we captured him. It was only because he violated the laws of the Ming dynasty that we had to capture him. But you guys, why did you dare to kill the brothers of the brocade guard? Do you know how big of a crime this is?" Bang. Just as Wei Guang wanted to gain the upper hand by a show of strength and wanted to question Yang Qindong, another gunshot rang out. The unprepared Wei Guang's left leg was also shot. He was originally half kneeling, but now he was completely kneeling on both knees and became shorter. How bold, capturing a mercenary soldier for no reason and still daring to argue with reason. You really deserve to be killed. Yang Qindong's face turned ashen. Perhaps it was because his body was too weak or because he was really angry, but his face gave people a terrifying feeling. When Yang Qindong said that he deserved to be killed, Tiger's Mane nodded his head and nodded towards Ba Daojiang and Ping Yu of the first guard team. The two of them strode to the kneeling Wei Guang and lifted him into the air with one arm each. What are you doing? What are you doing? I am the commander of the brocade guard, Xianxia. I was personally appointed by the emperor. I am an official of the imperial court. You have no right to do anything to me, no? As if he felt something, Wei Guang struggled and shouted loudly, explaining the severity of the situation. Deal with them one by one from small to large. Cough. Yang Qindong didn't pay attention to the shouting Wei Guang, but after saying this to Hu Mang, he leaned back, gasping, and his chest was constantly undulating at this moment. Young master, you need to take care of your body. Hu Mang blurted out this sentence unconsciously. It seemed that Yang Qindong's acting was too good, and he was speaking from his own feelings. However, Guan Ying and Ma Wei, who were about to plead for leniency, shut their mouths when they heard this. Yang Qindong was sick like this. Logically speaking, he should be recuperating, but he still walked out. This showed how important this matter was. Wei Guang brought this upon himself. If they pleaded now, it would seem that this matter had something to do with them. But who knew if the angry Yang Qindong would take care of them as well? Since it was none of his business, he could just let it go. If there were any benefits to be gained from telling him, he could still take the risk and give it a try. But the people of the embroidered uniform guards had always been ungrateful. Even if they spoke up for him now when they committed a crime in the future, they would not be lenient. If that was the case, why take the risk? No one spoke up for Wei Guang and the others. Tiger's Mane was naturally more straightforward when it came to doing things. First, he and Beta Persei each took a machete. Then they came in front of the ordinary embroidered uniform guards who were brought here. With a raise of their right arm, their heads were separated from their bodies. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei took turns to kill the other embroidered uniform guards. When it was Beta Persei's turn to raise his machete to kill Lu Xi, he actually wet his pants. Then he shouted loudly, "Don't kill me, I know who poisoned the Duke of Loyalty." Beta Persei, who had already raised his machete and was about to swing it down, suddenly stopped. It was as if he had been immobilized. "Lu Xi, do you not want to live anymore? Aren't you afraid that all 9 generations of your family will be executed?" Wei Guang, who was still emphasizing his identity to intimidate others not to touch him, suddenly heard Lu Xi's words. His expression changed drastically and cold sweat flowed down his face. As a trusted aide, Lu Xi had heard Wei Guang mention when he was drunk about the plan of the commander sending Sumaner to kill Yang Qindong. After he sobered up, Wei Guang even thought of silencing him. But at that time, Lucy knelt on the ground and swore that he would never speak of this matter. Otherwise he would die a horrible death. In the end, Wei Guang spared his subordinate's life. Perhaps he also thought that Lucy would not dare to speak of such an important matter because once it was spread, he would definitely die. Chapter 423. But who would have thought that he would finally say it in front of so many people? The consequences would be unimaginable. Wei Guang still wanted to say something to scare him, but Pring Yu and Ba Daojiang, who were sandwiching him, received a signal from Tiger's Mane and each of them punched him in the stomach. The intense pain made him shut his mouth immediately and groan in pain. Wei Guang did not speak, but Lucy stood there and laughed loudly. Execute my entire family? I'm sorry, but my ancestral home is Yunnan's Cheli department. When the Min King rebelled, everyone in my family was killed. No one was spared, so I'm the only one left. What's there to be afraid of? Lucy seemed to be venting something. After shouting, he suddenly turned to look at the side of the carriage and fell to his knees. This lowly one is Lucy, serving in the brocade guard. I have done many heinous things. I know that I have sinned deeply. However, the heavens are virtuous. I want to turn over a new leaf and start anew. I hope that the Duke of Loyalty can give this lowly one a chance. The heavens are indeed benevolent. Tell me everything you know. As long as it's true, I'll let you live. I'll even give you enough money to live the rest of your life. But remember, don't try to bite me. Otherwise, don't blame my gun for not recognizing you. Yang Chendong's voice slowly came out. Then the carriage turned around and faced the direction where Lucy knelt on the ground. As the carriage turned around, he gave a signal to Tiger's Mane. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty, for your understanding, Lucy said with a slightly emotional tone. He believed that since the Duke of Loyalty had made a promise in front of so many people, his life should be saved. With the thought of surviving a calamity, he raised his head and said loudly, Loyal Duke, the people who wanted to take your life were the embroidered uniform guards. They were afraid that your contributions were too great and would endanger the Emperor. Pucci. Lucy seemed to want to continue speaking, but a steel saber had already pierced through his back. The tip of the saber continued to drip blood after piercing through his chest. Lucy used the last of his strength to look sideways. When he saw that the person who killed him was actually his superior Wei Guang, there was a strong unwillingness in his eyes. After smacking his lips twice, he leaned back heavily with his eyes staring at the sky. He couldn't be more dead than he already was. The person who killed Lucy was Wei Guang. Just now, for some reason, Pring Yu and Ba Daojiang, who were originally holding him down, suddenly loosened their grip, giving him a chance to catch his breath. Then he heard Lucy's voice. How could Wei Guang listen to him when he was telling the truth? Lucy no longer had any relatives. Naturally, he was not afraid of being executed. However, his family members were all in Nanjing. Something really happened to them and he died. What about his family members? For his family, Wei Guang, who forced himself to take a breath, suddenly flew up and used the last trace of internal qi in his body to stab Lucy, who was telling the truth, through his heart. Lucy was finally dead. Although before he died he said that it was the genie guards who killed Yang Chendong. Fortunately, he didn't say the real mastermind behind the scenes. Everything was delayed. Wei Guang let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. When he raised his head to look at Yang Chendong, his voice was fierce and resolute as he said, That's right, I did it. I arranged for someone to poison you. I just didn't expect your life to be so tough that you still didn't die. But it doesn't matter. Seems that you only have half of your life left. Haha, you will spend the rest of your life in pain. In this way my goal has been achieved. I have achieved it. After saying this, Wei Guang, who was laughing, suddenly put the spring embroidery saber across his neck as if he was going to die. Hurry up and take the saber. Yang Chendong shouted anxiously. But in the end it was still too late. Without waiting for the others to do anything, the saber had already slit its owner's neck. Then blood splattered. Wei Guang fell to the ground with a plop without a trace of life or breath. Wei Guang had committed suicide. This scene made Guan Ying and Ma Wei's hearts jump. The change in front of their eyes was so fast that it was completely out of their expectations. However, they quickly calmed down and thought through everything. For Guan Ying, he even had a draft in his mind on how he was going to report today's matter to the court. It was nothing more than Wei Guang, who was jealous of the Duke of Loyalty's contributions, sending people to poison him. Then, seeing that he didn't die, he sent people to capture the mercenary soldiers, wanting to know how deeply the Duke of Loyalty had been poisoned. However, everything was discovered by the Duke of Loyalty. Then he committed suicide in front of everyone. Regardless of what Guan Ying and Ma Wei thought, after seeing Wei Guang commit suicide, the resentment in Yang Chendong's heart could be considered to have been vented a little. Su Munair had already said that the person who arranged for her to come to Yang Chendong's side and asked her to wait for an opportunity to make a move. The person who sent the poison bun was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Menda. This time Wei Guang came to the sect to clarify this matter. The embroidered uniform guards were the emperor's personal guards. Only the emperor had the authority to kill the people there. Otherwise, no matter how heinous the crime was, it wasn't something that others could casually touch. It was the same for Yang Chendong. Although he already had a certain level of strength and could be said to be above many other officials, if he killed Wei Guang, it would be equivalent to giving Zhou Xian a big slap in the face. Yang Chendong wasn't willing to do such a thankless thing unless it was absolutely necessary. As such, Wei Guang committing suicide was naturally the best outcome. As for why he was able to break free from Ping Yu and Ba Daozhang's restraints and kill Lu Si with his crippled legs, it was naturally the result after Yang Chendong gave Tiger's Mane a hint with his eyes. In these few years, the tacit understanding between the two was still very strong. Yang Chendong didn't need Lu Si to tell the truth because he already knew the truth. On the other hand, if the truth was revealed, would he seek revenge on Menda? If he did, would Zhou Xian have any thoughts and allow such a thing to happen? As such, this was the current scene. Wei Guang killed Lu Si and then committed suicide. Yang Chendong could remove himself from this matter completely and also take the opportunity to knock Menda and Zhou Xian down, letting them know how difficult it was to kill him. This time they were lucky to pass, but they might not be so lucky next time. Since his goal had been achieved, Yang Chendong naturally didn't need to stay here. Waving his hand, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei put down the curtains of the carriage, and then the large group of people left the magistrate court and Gaozhou prefecture. Along the way, neither Guan Ying nor Ma Wei stood out to say anything. Yang Chendong was indeed sick and it was quite serious. This was all seen with their own eyes. Not to mention this illness was poisoned by the brocade guards. As such, how could they still ask Yang Chendong to leave with the mercenaries? Not to mention, now that the King of Min was powerful, they still pointed at Yang Chendong in their hearts as a shield. They believed that with the existence of these mercenaries, even if the King of Min wanted to conquer Gaozhou and Laizhou, he would have to consider the strength of these mercenaries first. They successfully returned to their own military camp. Yang Chendong was completely different from before. His illness had long disappeared, and when he appeared in front of everyone, he was full of energy. "How is Lu Jian?" Yang Chendong asked Tiger's Mane as he walked towards the infirmary. "Young master, Lu Jian only suffered some superficial injuries. He will be fine after a good rest." "Oh yes, he didn't say anything when he was tortured by the brocade guards. He is really a tough man," Tiger's Mane said with a face full of admiration. "Not bad, no wonder he can become the platoon leader of the auxiliary troops. Tell him that after he recovers, let him report to the Cold Front Regiment. He has already passed the loyalty test." Yang Chendong nodded satisfactorily, then opened the tent of the infirmary. He saw Lu Jian, who had already fainted, but his facial features still gave off a sense of determination. Looking at Lu Jian, who was almost covered in wounds, Yang Chendong sighed and said, "Look, this is our warrior. How brave and tenacious. This is a true man. Tell all the Cold Front Regiment and auxiliary troops to learn from Lu Jian. Also, give Lu Jian a silver medal. This is the reward he deserves." Hearing about the silver medal, Tiger's Mane nodded heavily. "That is indeed the case. I will pass down the young master's order immediately." At this moment, Lu Jian was still in a coma. However, if he woke up and heard these words, he would definitely be extremely excited. One must know that the military medal not only represented personal glory, but it could also be converted into cash when faced with difficulties. This was set by Yang Chendong before he announced the medal system. This was because he was afraid that the country's heroes would face difficulties one day. If that really happened, a high-grade medal could be exchanged for a large amount of silver, enough to solve most problems and difficulties. 1451 AD, late July. After more than 10 days of bumpy travel, Kuang Yi, the southern Ming crown prince and minister of war, finally arrived at Gaozhou Prefecture of Guangdong. The reason why it was a few turns was because some of the cities from Nanjing to here were already occupied by the king of Min. He had to change his route several times along the way. Guang Ye's entry into Gaozhou Prefecture was a secret. Even his journey was very secretive. No one knew if the king of Min had placed any spies in southern Ming. If the route was made public, who knew how many times he would have to face assassination? It was even uncertain if he could safely reach Gaozhou Prefecture. Because it was hidden, when Guang Yi suddenly appeared in Gaozhou Prefecture, it really shocked Guan Ying and Ma Wei. Chapter 424. The journey was too long and the journey was not peaceful. The news that Guang Yi had regained his power and was promoted half a rank hadn't reached here yet. So when he saw Guang Yi appear, Guan Ying's face was full of shock. His first feeling was that his teacher had been kicked out of the capital by Ying Zong. "Greetings, Lord Guang." Ma Wei also broke out in a cold sweat. He also didn't know what had happened to this old minister recently. However, since he was here, he still had to be respectful. After leaving here, he would immediately send someone to the capital to find out more about Guang Yi. Guang Ye's eyes fell on the two's expressions. This old man who was over 60 years old was extremely wise and far-sighted. With a single glance, he saw through the two's thoughts. Chuckling, he said, "Generals, there is no need to be surprised. This old man came to Gaozhou Prefecture under the emperor's orders. Oh right. The emperor empathized with my loyalty and bravery and specially conferred me the title of Grand Tutor to the Crown Prince." Guan Ying Ma became excited when he heard the Crown Prince's words. He clasped his hands and said, "Congratulations, teacher." "Congratulations, Lord Guang." Ma Wei also quickly changed the way he addressed Guang Yi. He no longer called him Lord Guang like before but Minister Guang. "Congratulations to you too." Guang Ye's wrinkled face smiled. He had seen Ma Wei's performance just now. His attitude towards these people was only perfunctory. Firstly, this was not a direct descendant that he had nurtured, and secondly, the other party was the commander of the Guangdong Guards, a martial official of the 3 ranks. If he was too close to the other party, once this news reached the court and reached the emperor's ears, who knew what kind of adverse effects it would bring? Maintaining a certain distance and only maintaining the relationship of a superior and subordinate was how an evergreen official should behave. "Teacher, something happened a few days ago. I have secretly reported it to the imperial court, but I don't think you know about it." After the pleasantries, Guan Ying said carefully, "What is it?" Guang Yi had a bad feeling when he heard that Guan Ying had secretly reported it to the imperial court. He knew that ordinary small matters couldn't be reported, especially when the situation was so unstable. Trivial matters couldn't be reported. He also understood Guan Ying's character. Guan Ying was far-sighted and would not be entangled over such a small matter. Now that Guan Ying had brought it up in such a serious manner, it could not be anything good. "Teacher, Wei Guang of the Imperial Court's Brocade Guard has died. He committed suicide in front of us." The reason for his death was... Although he didn't know why Guang Yi was here, given the current situation, if the Minister of War didn't stay in the capital to organize and command the army, but instead came to Gaozhou, a place that seemed like it was about to be abandoned, something big must have happened. Based on his analysis and intuition, Guan Ying believed that it had something to do with Yang Qindong and the mercenaries. Therefore he first told him about Yang Qindong being poisoned. Guan Ying was indeed capable. At the very least he had good foresight. After he finished speaking, he saw the shock on Guang Ye's face. "Wait, what did you say? Was the Duke of Loyalty poisoned?" Wei Guang even admitted that he did it? "Well, Minister, you must be tired from traveling so far. I will go arrange for a banquet." When Ma Wei heard this, his expression changed again and again. He felt that the teacher and disciple had something important to talk about. It was really awkward for him to stand there with his status, so he found an excuse to leave. Guang Yi was very satisfied with Ma Wei's tactfulness. However, his thoughts were more on Yang Qindong. "Guan Ying, how is the Duke of Loyalty?" "Not too good. I took a look at him that day. His complexion was not good and his body was very weak," Guan Ying answered honestly. What should we do?" Hearing that Yang Qindong's body was in such a bad state, Guang Ye's expression was full of hatred. He had seen Yang Qindong countless times. This kind of young man seemed to always have an inexhaustible amount of energy. Even a small illness would not affect his body. However, from Guan Ying's description he seemed to be like a lamp that had run out of oil. One could imagine how severe the poison was. Thinking that the Southern Ming Empire's hopes were mostly placed on Yang Qindong, if something really happened to him, there would be no link between the Southern Ming Empire and the mercenary army. For the current situation it was definitely not a good thing. He said angrily, "What do the imperial bodyguards want to do? Get rid of the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness?" Wei Guang alone would not have such ability and courage. There must be someone behind him. However, they did not think about it. If something really happened to Yang Qindong, who would be able to quell the Min King's rebellion? The person behind this is really... At this point Kuang Yi stopped talking because he suddenly thought of the person behind the Imperial Secret Service. For a big matter like dealing with Yang Qindong without that person's permission, normal people would not have the guts to act on their own. Could it be that this was really his intention? Once the thought appeared in his mind, it could not be dismissed. Thinking about it carefully, that person did have a reason to act. Yang Qindong was ultimately too young and so capable. The existence of such a person was originally a huge threat and pressure. The emperor was still young, but once he grew old and that person was still alive, would his descendants be able to suppress Yang Qindong? If they could not, what would happen? What Yang Qindong lacked now was experience and enough merit. However, he was still young. Once he was given enough power, these could be made up for. Once he had everything he needed, it would be even more difficult to control him. This led to the poisoning incident after the Huang bandit army incident was over. Seemed to make more sense. There was another problem. If it was really his intention, why did he not tell him when he received the order to come this time? Even if it was just a hint, it would be good, right? He would not let him be in such a passive position, right? It wasn't impossible to think of other ways to solve this problem. Now that he had come to Gaozhou Prefecture and was seen by so many people, it would not be long before Yang Qindong received the news. When that time came, what should he do? If he did not meet the other party, how should he talk? The emperor was afraid of him and wanted to poison him. Would he still dare to put such a person in an important position? For a moment, countless questions rose in Kuang Ye's mind, causing him to feel a headache. He originally thought that after coming to Gaozhou Prefecture and seeing Yang Qindong and promising him many benefits, he would have a chance to persuade this person to help him. But now it seemed that everything was going to be overturned. He also felt helpless. Teacher, teacher. Seeing that Kuang Yi seemed to be in a daze, Guan Ying carefully called out to him. What's wrong? Kuang Yi regained his senses and asked Guan Ying. Teacher. You must have an important mission for coming here this time, but I wonder what the mission is? If you want to put the Duke of Loyalty in an important position, shouldn't you reconsider? Guan Ying did not go into too much detail. But to smart people there was no need to be so thorough. Many times it was best to stop at a certain point. That's right. Kuang Yi nodded, then said, Come, bring me a brush and ink. This official wants to explain everything that happened here to the emperor, then send someone to send it out at the fastest speed possible. The news of Kuang Ye's arrival in Gaozhou Prefecture was immediately reported by the city's security bureau to the mercenary camp 5 li outside the city. Tiger's Mane excitedly brought the news to the military tent. When he saw Yang Qindong, he excitedly said, Young Master, Minister Kuang Yi is here. As you expected, we will be of great use. He's finally here? After hearing this, Yang Qindong's expression was calm as if everything was within his expectations. But then he shook his head. Things have changed. Wei Guang's death and the words that Lu Si said before he died. Even if we don't care, I'm afraid that others will. Sai, it seems that if we want the plan to go smoothly, we have to continue pretending to be sick. Continue pretending to be sick? Why? Tiger's Mane asked with a puzzled expression. Tiger's Mane, young master, let me ask you. In your heart, are you afraid of a lively enemy or a sick enemy who could die at any time? Hearing Yang Qindong's question, Tiger's Mane was puzzled, but he still answered instinctively, Of course it's a lively enemy. But what does this have to do with us? Tiger's Mane, who had just finished speaking, immediately shut his mouth. Obviously he had thought of something. Seeing Tiger's Mane's enlightened expression, Yang Qindong laughed and said, Okay, you're not too stupid. Okay, go and inform the brothers in the 1st and 2nd guards. Tell them that once Kuang Yi comes, tell them to act more angry and sad. As for what to do, go and teach them. I saw that your performance last time was very good. Hearing this new mission, Tiger's Mane said with a bitter face, "Young master, it's not that my performance was good, but your acting last time was too good, so much so that I believed it was true." "Alright then, let's do as you say." Yang Qindong laughed loudly. He casually sent Tiger's Mane away, then picked up the pen and continued to write a letter home. The letter was written to Su Monair, who had already been sent to Crimson City. The two of them had only been together for a short while, but because of some things they had no choice but to separate. They were like newlyweds, it was impossible to say that they did not miss each other. Of course, writing a letter to Su Monair was not a privilege that only she enjoyed. For example, 2nd Madame Qiao Yin and 4th Madame Lady Xiang, who were in the Yang family manor in the capital, would also communicate with Yang Qindong from time to time. Even Wan Xiaoyu, who had always been in Crimson City, would also communicate with Yang Qindong from time to time. But this time when he wrote to Su Monair, Yang Qindong did not say any words of love. Instead he told her in detail about how he had pretended to be poisoned. He also said that he had arranged for people to keep an eye on the capital and Nanjing of the Southern Ming dynasty. He wanted to see if there was anyone who could redress the Su family's reputation. If there was, then it was worth it for him to pretend to be sick. On the other hand, it would mean that the other party did not keep their promises. Since that was the case, he would have to seek justice himself. Chapter 425. Early the next morning, an unexpected guest arrived at the mercenaries' camp. Guan Ying and Ma Wei were standing behind the old man. As soon as they appeared, the gate of the mercenary camp was opened. Commander Luo came to greet them in person. "Greetings, Minister Kuang." Tiger's Mane stepped forward and saluted. "My young master knew that you would come, so he asked me to wait here to greet you. Please come with me." Kuang Yi nodded and then said to Guan Ying and Ma Wei behind him, "You two stay here. When you have time you can learn how to lead troops from Commander Luo. I'm going to visit Duke Zhongdan." Hear this. Guan Ying seemed to be worried and wanted to say something, but Kuang Yi waved his hand and then followed Tiger's Mane to the depths of the camp. In the largest tent, Yang Qindong had finished his makeup, which made Hu Yan and Madame Shui exclaim in surprise. "Lu Lang, your skill is so powerful. It really looks like you have suffered a serious internal injury." Hu Yan looked amazed and her hand couldn't help but touch Yang Qindong's face. Yang Qindong quickly dodged to the left and right to avoid her touch. Yang Qindong had practiced the art of makeup a lot in his previous life. Sometimes, in order to complete a task, he had to disguise himself as various people. Not only did he have to look good, but he also had to learn how to disguise himself. Otherwise, how could he fool others? "Yes, my husband looks so haggard now. If I didn't know the truth, I would believe it." Madame Shui also stared at Yang Qindong's face, trying to find a flaw. However, no matter how hard she looked, she couldn't find the problem. It seemed that Yang Qindong was really sick. No matter how thick-skinned he was, Yang Qindong felt a little embarrassed when the two women stared at him like this. He changed the topic and said, "Your husband is well prepared. It will depend on your performance later. You always talk about how good you are at acting. This time it's time to test you. Don't screw up." "What do you mean by screw up?" Hu Yan asked with interest. "It means don't screw up," Yang Qindong explained awkwardly. "Oh, then we won't let you down," Hu Yan and Madame Shui said in unison. They understood what Madame Shui said. At this moment Beta Persei rushed in. "Young Master, Tiger's Head and Minister Qi are here." "Oh." As soon as he said this, there was a sad cry. Who else could it be but Hu Yan and Madame Shui? The show began. After a smile appeared on Yang Qindong's mouth, his body also lay down on the bed. It seemed that even breathing was very laborious. Yang Air stared at the scene in front of him with his mouth agape. He thought to himself, as expected, birds of a feather flock together. Look, this family is full of acting experts. I still have to learn from them. But I don't know if I can learn a thing or two from them in this life. Outside the tent, Hu Mang finally led Kuang Yi into the tent, and what he saw was this very sad scene. There were cries and sighs, and there was even blood in the spittoon beside the bed. It seemed that Yang Qindong had just vomited blood not long ago. "A loyal and courageous Duke, how did you become like this?" Even though he was mentally prepared, he had heard Guan Ying explain Yang Qindong's condition in detail yesterday. But this morning he still came to take a look because he was worried. Originally he came with doubts, but the moment he entered the tent the situation changed completely. He even felt sad for some reason. He could not help but think that some people were too much. This was a hero of the Southern Ming Empire. How could they treat him like this? Beta Persei lowered his head and said nothing. He moved a chair to the side of the bed as if to let Kuang Yi sit down. But the sound of the chair slamming on the ground showed his attitude towards Kuang Yi. He was extremely unwelcome. Beta Persei, don't be rude. Yang Qindong, who was on the bed, opened his eyes with great effort and scolded softly. Then he forced a smile and said to Kuang Yi, Minister Qi is here. Hurry. Take a seat. You can leave too. Cough cough cough. With the help of Hu Yan and Lady Shui, Yang Qindong got up with great effort and sat down with his back against a large futon. Then Hu Yan and the others tactfully left. Beta Persei did not want to leave, but Yang Qindong said, You can leave. Minister Qi is a good person. He won't harm me. Beta Persei reluctantly left the tent. Kuang Yi's face turned red when he heard that he wouldn't harm him. Of course he knew what Yang Qindong meant. Kuang Yi felt sad when he thought about how the originally handsome and lively young man had been plotted against and ended up like this. He thought about how he had been wronged when he was ordered to stay at home to recuperate. The words heaven's might is unpredictable involuntarily entered Kuang Yi's heart. Although he felt indignant in Kuang Yi's heart, the emperor was the emperor. He could not let anyone question him, not even himself. After suppressing the complicated emotions in his heart, he looked at Yang Qindong with a face full of concern. Duke Xiongdan, regarding the matter of Wei Guang's poisoning, I have already written an urgent letter to the capital. I will definitely give you an explanation. Forget it. He's already dead. Besides, Minister Kuang, do you really think he has the guts to do all this? Yang Qindong's question hit the nail on the head, leaving Kuang Yi speechless. If he said no, it would be the same as criticizing the emperor. If he said yes, it would be an insult to his and Yang Qindong's intelligence. This was a question that couldn't be answered and couldn't be answered. Kuang Yi sighed and did not dwell on this question. Instead he spoke in a comforting tone for Yang Qindong. Duke Xiongdan, you have been wronged recently. I also heard that some people are still calling you Duke of Loyalty and Courage. I was angry about this and gave the order. Although your title of Duke of Loyalty and Courage was given by King Yu, since we have recognized him as the Daizong, his title is naturally reasonable. If anyone dares to call him that in the future, you can punish them. Kuang Yi was trying to comfort Yang Qindong by saying that he was on Yang Qindong's side. However, he was only on Yang Qindong's side psychologically. Many people would often say, You are a good person and I support you spiritually. However, Yang Qindong did not need such a good person card. Politics was not a game. It was not a matter of good for you, good for me, good for everyone. In order to achieve their own ideals, those who opposed could become mortal enemies. It was common to even fight with swords. Just because you're a good person, how can you lower your head and accept everything when you've been wronged? Therefore, after listening to Kuang Yi's words, Yang Qindong quickly counterattacked. Sai, it's just a title of duke. It's not like Prince Shiping was given the title of prince. There's no need to be so calculative. A cold breath came from the bottom of his heart and went straight to his head. Kuang Yi widened his eyes and looked at Yang Qindong in disbelief. There was hesitation and doubt in his eyes, but more than that there was fear and horror. This young man actually wanted the title of prince and envied Prince Mubin of Shiping. However, did he not know that since the establishment of the Great Ming Dynasty, Mubin was the only prince with a different surname who was still alive? There was only one prince after so many years. Yang Qindong actually wanted to be one of them. His courage and desire were beyond the reach of ordinary people. It was no wonder that the emperor was wary of him. For such an ambitious person, even if Kuang Yi was in the emperor's position, he would also be wary of him. He might even do something regardless of the consequences. Kuang Yi was stunned. In Yang Qindong's eyes, he forced a smile on his pale face. Minister Kuang, it's just a joke. You don't believe it, do you? How could that be? This old man was just amazed by the courage of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Kuang Yi chuckled perfunctorily. However, in his heart he thought, who would believe that you are joking? How can some things be taken as a joke? In just a few words, Yang Qindong had already stated his expectations. This also made Kuang Yi realize that after using him last time he threw him to the side and even sent someone to poison him. He was afraid that he had already hurt his feelings. If he wanted to use him to send troops he would have to pay a heavy price. The position of prince was one of the requirements. Even though he had expected Yang Chendong to demand an exorbitant price when he invited him again, he did not expect such an outrageous request. At this moment even Kuang Yi wanted to retreat. Today's trip was to see the condition of Yang Chendong's body. If possible he wanted to test whether he could continue to lead the mercenaries to work for the great Ming dynasty. He originally thought that it would be difficult to achieve the second requirement. After all, it was a bit comical to talk about sending troops in front of a sick person. However, Yang Chendong's initiative allowed these two requirements to be met. It was just that the results were not very satisfactory. As if he knew that Kuang Ye's probing had achieved its goal. Or perhaps Yang Chendong's body was really not good and he had reached his body's limit for receiving guests for so long. At this moment he began to cough again and could not stop. This caused Hu Yen and the others who were waiting outside the tent to quickly rush in. Chapter 426. As soon as these people came in, Kuang Yi knew that he had to leave. He wanted to see if there were any other ways to solve the problem. But when he saw Yang Chendong's attitude and his current physical condition, he knew that it was meaningless to say anything more. Kuang Yi left. Just like when he came, Tiger's Mane sent him out of the barracks. Yang Chendong stopped coughing, shook his head and said, "It's hard work to pretend to be sick. I hope I can fool this old guy." His words made both Hu Yen and Madame Shui laugh. This was their husband. When he was serious he was a little scary but sometimes he was very cute. Yang Chendong did this to deceive Kuang Yi, and he also took the opportunity to put forward his request. In fact, Kuang Yi was indeed deceived. Yang Chendong's makeup skills were too good, or it could be said that the things in the warehouse were too good, so good that they could not be found in this era. That was why he could deceive everyone. "Teacher, how is Duke Zhongdan's condition?" On the way back to the city, Guan Ying asked in a low voice. When he saw Kuang Ye's gloomy face after leaving the barracks, he felt a little nervous. After all, a while ago he was not respectful to Yang Chendong and even wanted to trick him. What he did was likely to ruin his teacher's plan, and he was a little worried about it. "He's really sick," Kuang Yi answered in a low voice, and the image of Yang Chendong's terminally ill flashed in his mind. "I wonder if I can still lead troops into battle?" Guan Ying continued to ask in a low voice. This was the main point he was concerned about. He had already received the news that King of Min's faction had begun to deploy troops and generals while stabilizing the current results. They were preparing to expand the results of the war. As one of the occupied areas, Guangdong was obviously intolerable. That was to say, even if they did not take the initiative to attack, it would not be long before King Min took the initiative to deal with them. Lead the army to fight? Kuang Yi shook his head. Who knows? However, if you want him to fight, you have to agree to one of his conditions. You have to become a king like Shiping Wang Mu Bin. Kuang Yi whispered when he saw that no one else was around. What? Crowned king? Guaning almost couldn't hold himself back and yelled out. However, he quickly shut his mouth. From his expression, it could be seen that he was frightened as well. Who was Mu Bin? He was the descendant of the Mu family and had been loyal for generations. He was forced to be a king because he was going to pacify Yunnan this time. However, from the looks of it now, it did not seem to be of much use. This was because the commander-in-chief knew that the failure of Dong Xing, this stupid teammate, had prevented him from unleashing his full strength. But in any case, Mu Bin, who was crowned as a king, was like a nail nailed to the back of King of Min, so that they could not attack Nanjing with all their strength. From this point of view, the crowning as a king had some effect. Who was Yang Chendong? Although he was also the descendant of the Yang family and was also a loyal family, he just saved the leader of the mercenaries by coincidence. He did not have any real power in his hands, so why should he be a king? Of course, it was a bit too much to say why. After all, Yang Chendong saved Ingzong's life and defeated the Walla's invasion on behalf of Ingzong. Now he had the merit of pacifying the chaos in Guangdong, which was also a great achievement. But because of this, he could not be a king casually. Everything was because he was too powerful. He was so powerful that it was a little scary. Unlike Mu Bin, whose influence was only in Yunnan, he was nothing outside of Yunnan. Because of Yang Chendong's power, once he was crowned as a king, It was hard to predict what the consequences would be. Thinking of this, Guan Ying did not dare to say anything. And these were also seen by Kuang Yi. He could not help but sigh in his heart. There were some people in the Great Ming dynasty who were crowned as kings, such as Zhongshan Prince Suda, Kaiping Prince Chong Yuchen, Chiang Prince Li Wenzhong, Ningyi Prince Deng Yu, Dongou Prince Tang He, Qianing Prince Mu Ying, and now Shiping Prince Mu Bin. But except for the last one, the others were all crowned as kings after they died. Yang Qindong was a living person. When he thought of living people, he could not help but think of Yang Qindong's weak body. Kuang Yi thought in his heart that perhaps this person would not live for long. In this case, crowning him as a king did not seem to be an unrealistic idea. Kuang Ye's heart became hesitant at first. When he was sure that Yang Qindong was seriously ill, the idea of crowning him as a king was born. Of course, he also knew that such a big matter could not be decided by himself. He still needed to ask the emperor for instructions. And so, after sending out the urgent letter yesterday, another urgent letter was sent out after he returned to the study of the Gaozhou government. Pingan, Beijing, Japan. The imperial city of Japan was also called the Imperial Palace of the Great Inner City. It represented the highest power in Japan, and was also the political, cultural, and economic center of the country. As the 102nd Emperor of Japan, Yen Ren was known as the Emperor of the Garden. This kind of name was very common in Japan. The people here were also very used to naming people after places such as the foot of the mountain, the mouth of the river, the bridge, and so on. The Emperor of Japan was originally the most noble existence in this country. In fact, this was indeed the case to the outside world. Many orders were issued by the Emperor of the Garden and known to the people. But in reality, Yen Ren was more of a puppet-like existence. At least in some matters, he had to look at other people's faces and listen to other people's opinions before he could make the final decision. As a descendant of the royal family, Yen Ren naturally did not want to disgrace the name of the emperor. In private, he had been working hard to change this situation. This was why he sent his favorite daughter, Princess Junko, to the Great Ming dynasty. At that time, the Great Ming dynasty was very powerful to the outside world. At least it was far from what Japan could compare to. They still had to look up to this big country in the east. After Princess Junko was sent out, some information came back through various channels. But most of it was about the princess's experience in the northern capital of the Great Ming dynasty. The most mentioned person was a young man called Yang Qindong. The letter said that Yang Qindong was only in his early 20s, but he had already been conferred the title of duke and had a lot of influence in the Great Ming dynasty. Regarding the records in this letter, Yen Ren naturally had a feeling of dislike towards Yang Qindong. It was not because of anything else. In his eyes, if such a person continued to develop, he would often become a powerful minister, just like General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. It was just that no matter whether Yen Ren liked Yang Qindong or not, when Shaolin suddenly came to the palace and brought back an important news, the emperor was finally shaken and had a better understanding of the name Yang Qindong. In a secret room deep in the palace, this place was not known to outsiders. Those who could come here were all very important people trusted by the emperor. Shaolin was able to appear here because of a piece of news he brought back, as well as the handwritten letter he took out from Princess Junko. When Junko left Japan, she and her father had agreed on some of the secret words in the letter. In other words, on the surface there was nothing wrong with some of the letters. But only the father and daughter could see the authenticity of the letter and whether it was written under coercion. The letter that Shaolin brought was naturally out of Junko's sincerity, and the contents of the letter were not fake. This was something that Emperor Yenren could see at a glance. It was precisely because this letter was real that Emperor Yenren was even more shocked. After carefully reading the letter 3 times, he said with a serious face, "Little Lin-kun, please tell me the truth about what you saw and heard." Shaolin nodded and then told him in detail how he met Yang Qindong for the first time with the princess, how he was chased and had to live in the Yang family village, and everything he saw later. It took more than an hour for Shaolin to finish telling the story. Then he looked at Yen Ren, who should be respected the most in Japan, and said, "Your Majesty, this Duke of Zhongdan is the most powerful and capable young man I have ever seen. It seems that there is nothing he can't do, and there seems to be nothing he can't solve." "Wait, you mean he's very powerful? How is he compared to the general?" Hearing this, Yen Ren interrupted and asked. "He should be stronger than him. After all, when he was young, the general wasn't as powerful as he is now." Shaolin only hesitated for a moment before giving the answer quickly. Swish 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 swish. Yanren seemed to be very satisfied with such an answer and kept nodding his head. Alright, tell me about the cannon. It was no wonder that he asked this question. A cannon was priced at 10 million taels of silver. Yanren believed that his daughter Junko knew what this amount of money meant, but she still wrote it in the letter and suggested to buy one. It was no wonder that Yanren valued it so much. This. In front of the emperor, Shaolin naturally didn't dare to hide anything. Your Majesty, I have never seen the cannon when it was fired, but I have seen the terrible consequences after it was fired. Terrible consequences? Yes, it was like a barren land, as if the heavens were angry. Shaolin tried his best to describe the scene after he saw the cannon blast on Qirajing Street. However, Emperor Yanren's expression changed again and again when he heard these words. In his mind, he seemed to have sketched out a very shocking scene, and this scene was soon installed in the general's mansion. It was as if a cannon blast could kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and he would regain control of the highest authority in Japan. I'll raise the money now and I'll leave the contact with the mercenaries to you. Don't let me down. Finally, Yanren made up his mind. Although 10 million taels of silver was a huge burden to him, in order to regain control of the country he agreed without hesitation. Ha-ee. Shaolin nodded excitedly. With such a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, he could imagine that once he succeeded he would be put in an important position. By then he might even stand at the top of Japan. Chapter 427. The mercenary camp outside Gaozhou Prefecture. The Emperor of Japan agreed to buy cannons and prepared 10 million taels of silver for this purpose. The news had already been sent to him. After reading it, Yang Qindong only ordered everything to proceed according to plan and handed it over to Commander Gao Xiong to handle. He threw this piece of information aside. Compared to Japan, which was far away at sea, Yang Qindong was more concerned about the situation in front of him. He was more concerned about whether or not he could be crowned king. Originally, Yang Qindong did not have such extravagant hopes. He only thought about how to use war to expand his military strength and get more things he needed. After all, if Lung Feng wanted to develop, it would not be possible without a sufficient population base. He did not want to use outsiders and trusted the Han people more, so he could only set his sights on the Great Ming. Facts had also proven that war was indeed the best way to test the strength of an army. At the same time, it was also the best opportunity to expand the army. He had obtained so many soldiers and taels of silver just by wiping out a motley crew of yellow bandits with only a few 100,000 people. This made Yang Qindong see the benefits that war could bring to him. However, he did not expect that the situation in Yunnan was so critical that Ingzong Qizhen threw aside the laws of the ancestors and gave Marquis Shiping the title of King of Shiping. One should not underestimate this title of king with a different surname. Once he had the identity of a king, he could open his own mansion and have his own army. Although the number of people could not exceed 3,000 for Yang Qindong, once he had this kind of power, there were probably not many places in the world that he could not go. There were too many benefits to becoming a king, so it was not an example. This made Yang Qindong very excited. However, he also knew that even if Mu Bin could be crowned king with a different surname, it was only a special event in a special period. It was not hereditary, so it was destined that the title of King of Shiping was only effective on Mu Bin. Otherwise, his descendants would not be able to enjoy such treatment. Even Mu Bin had so many backup plans when he was crowned king. If he wanted to be crowned king, it would be even more difficult. Not to mention that Zhu Qizhen had always been afraid of him. In this regard, the two brothers Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu had the same attitude. However, with the example before him, no matter how difficult it was, Yang Qindong had to fight for it. To him, this was definitely an opportunity. In the words of the commoners, if they missed this opportunity, they might not be able to find it again. With this goal in mind, when Kuang Yi came to visit him, he mentioned that he was very envious of Kuang Yi being conferred the title of king. At the same time, he pretended to be seriously ill in order to increase the chances of this matter becoming a reality. Of course, if he really wanted Zhu Qizhen to relent, just doing this was not enough. In other words, the more complicated the situation on the battlefield was, the more danger the Southern Ming Empire was in, and the higher the chances of success would be. Therefore, during these days, Yang Qindong had been paying attention to the movement of Prince of Min's faction. After waiting for days and nights, they finally made a move. The Miao people were the first to react. This time, the Prince of Min's faction was able to defeat the southern Ming army and progress at lightning speed. The Miao people's help was completely inseparable. It was because of the Miao family's courage to fight, kill and charge that the southern Ming army was defeated and lost a large amount of territory and land in a very short period of time. At that time, there was no such thing as 56 ethnic groups being one family. As a minority, they were often limited from birth. Their birth meant that they would not have much success in their lives. Things like being high up in the imperial court, that was something that they did not even want to think about. As a result, each generation was worse than the previous generation. In addition to the bad living environment, the lives of the Miao people were getting worse day by day. It was not until Zhou Xian established the southern Ming dynasty in Nanjing that he increased taxes in order to achieve his goal of recuperating faster. This made the Miao people, who did not have a good life to begin with, live an abyss of suffering under the heavy burden. Wherever there was oppression, there would be resistance. Just as the Miao family was suffering, the Prince of Min's messenger came and promised many benefits, which made some of the leaders of the Miao family tempted. After that, they started the war. When they left their hometown and went all the way to Guangdong, they finally knew what was called wealth. In comparison, it seemed that their previous lives were too poor. Under sudden wealth, it would often make a person dizzy and change their way of doing things. This was the case for the Miao army. They didn't have to spend much effort to take down a few cities. After grabbing a lot of good things, the greed in their hearts couldn't be suppressed. Gradually, they started to like the feeling of looting. The main force of the Prince of Min's faction was still digesting the cities in their hands and constantly recruiting soldiers to consolidate their strength. When the Jiaoxi army was taking down cities, they did not forget to transfer good things and some people to their own country. Only the Miao army did not care about cities and did not think about conquering the world. They were more interested in the benefits in front of them. It could be said that they were short-sighted or unambitious. In short, they were the fiercest when it came to attacking cities. Often after taking down a city, they would loot for a few days. Then they would leave the city and move on to a new target, continuing the pace of attacking cities. As they looted and moved, it was the Miao family who had the least number of people that caused the most damage. In less than a month, they had destroyed more than a dozen cities and state capitals, and the number of people affected by the disaster had reached more than 1 million. The Miao army, which was divided into several groups, was like a swarm of locusts. Wherever they went, the crops would be destroyed and the people would be displaced. Supposedly, the south of the Great Ming dynasty had not experienced any wars for many years. The people were still rich. If it were other armies that came here, it would not be difficult to raise military provisions. However, the bad thing was that the people who came were Miao people. Not only did they snatch food, money and women, they also burned the things that they could not eat. It was as if they were venting their poor lives over the years. Such actions naturally caused the number of victims in Yunnan, Guangxi and Guangdong provinces to increase. Later on, when many people found out about the Miao army's actions, they did not wait for the Miao army to attack and left their homes with their families. Although people were not willing to leave the hometown that they had lived in for a long time, compared to being able to live, more people chose to leave home. Only a portion of the elderly who were old and had bad legs chose to stay. They looked like they would die in their hometown even if they died. The disaster of the Miao army was not inferior to the disaster of the Great Ming dynasty. This point was quickly reached and was publicly announced in the main hall of the southern Ming dynasty. Wang Zhua and a few other senior officials also wrote to the emperor, requesting that the emperor send troops to deal with the Miao army to save the people from this disaster. Some of these people were sincerely loyal to the country, and some were because their ancestral homes were in the 3 provinces. Among them, there were some officials who were unlucky. Their hometowns were occupied and their fields were occupied by the Miao army. In their anger, they naturally hoped that the emperor would send troops to encircle them and help them regain everything that they had lost. There were more and more memorials asking for troops, covering the entire dragon table. Zhou Xian's expression also became more and more ugly. How could he not want to send troops to deal with the rebellion? But first he had to have the strength to do so. The Great Ming dynasty, especially the south, had not seen soldiers for a long time. From the results of Kuang Ye's previous inspection, after many years of recuperation, some of the southern Ming dynasty guards had some soldiers that could be used. However, they had their own mission. Guarding their own territory was their heavy responsibility. If they were to transfer these soldiers now and gather them to deal with the King of Min's rebellion. If there were too few people, there would be no effect on the overall situation. If there were too many people, the rear would be empty and there would be new rebellions. If that was the case, the southwest would change and the southeast would have trouble, then the southern Ming regime would be in danger. Robbing the east wall to pay the west wall. If the west wall collapsed because of this, the gains would not make up for the losses. But if they did not transfer troops, they would not be able to solve the problem at hand. Although the Ministry of War had already started to recruit soldiers, it still needed a certain amount of time. At this time, Kuang Ye's second urgent report was sent to Zhou Xian's desk. This report was about yesterday's matter of the brocade guard. After Wei Guang committed suicide, it emphasized that Yang Qindong was poisoned and that it was important to send troops to learn from Mu Bin and be crowned king. Trash, a bunch of trash. In the throne room, Zhou Xian, who had read the report, raised his hand and threw the urgent report to the head eunuch Cao Jixiang, who was serving him. Your Majesty, please calm down. Take care of your dragon body. Cao Jixiang still didn't know what had happened, so he knelt down on the ground with a frightened look. Calm down, calm down. Every day you only know how to calm down my anger. But you have to do something that makes me happy. That Wei Guang, not only did he fail to kill Mu Bin, but he also admitted everything. Not only did he cause me to be labeled as a meritorious official, but now he wants the throne from me. Tell me, should I give it to him or not? Zhou Xian, whose face was livid, roared and stared at Cao Jixiang to express his dissatisfaction. Cao Jixiang's face instantly paled. Your Majesty, does Yang Qindong want to be crowned king? Who else could it be other than him? Zhou Xian's voice implied this fact. That won't do. Hearing this, Cao Jixiang's eyes kept darting around as he spoke. Hearing Cao Jixiang say no, Zhou Xian became interested. My dear minister, why do you say no? Cao Jixiang, who was kneeling on the ground, quickly crawled forward and came to Zhou Xian's feet. He raised his head and said with a loyal expression, Your Majesty, it's a rule set by our ancestors that people with different surnames cannot be crowned king. King Shiping is an exception, but it turns out that it's not very useful to be crowned king with different surnames. Moreover, if we give it to whoever wants it, the world will be in chaos. Once the world is at peace, how will we deal with them? I'm afraid we can't get rid of them. Chapter 428. Cao Jixiang's voice was still echoing in Zhou Xian's ears, but the unlucky Emperor Ingzong didn't say anything. From the moment Mu Bin became the king of Shiping, he knew that some things were out of his control. Once he was bestowed the title of prince, it was equivalent to having his own prince's mansion and even his own guard army. Although the number of people could not be too large, the mountain was high and the emperor was far away. Who knew if there was a restless heart under the surface of obedience? Especially a king who became a king by fighting, who had killed a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, had more specific military strength that couldn't be underestimated. But if he wasn't a king, how could they do their best? Marquis Mu Bin of Shiping was already the boss of Yunnan. There was nothing left to be conferred, nothing to be rewarded. If he wanted to use him as a bystander, there was no other way except for this move. He had no choice but to do this. Although the effect was not very good in any case with Mu Bin watching from the rear, it also took a lot of energy from King Min's side, so they couldn't attack the hinterland of the south. A king's title only played a role of restraint. Zhou Xian was a little dissatisfied in his heart, but what could he do? He was the emperor, the son of heaven, but if he didn't have enough strength, how many people would listen to him? For the emperor, being a king for the sake of fighting was tantamount to giving away part of his power, which might be regarded as a disgrace. At the very least, none of his ancestors had ever done such a thing. But it was still better than being forced to perish. If he persisted for the sake of face and finally let King Min's side come to Nanjing at that time, he would really be a sinner of the Zhou family, and he would have no face to see his ancestors. Thinking that the current situation was so erosive and difficult, Zhou Xian began to seriously consider what Kuang Yi said about Yang Qindong's proposal. My dear minister, how is Duke Zhongdan's health? Also, I asked you to find a way to contact the mercenaries. Is there any progress? When these things were mentioned, Cao Jixiang's face became very ugly. He, who was originally clamoring that he couldn't be conferred the title of king, quickly lowered his head and said, Your Majesty, please calm down. This subject is incompetent. Zhou Xian couldn't be blamed for saying that. Whether it was Yang Qindong or the mercenaries, the embroidered uniform guard hadn't made any progress in such a long time. Needless to say, the mercenaries had perfect military discipline. Furthermore, the soldiers who were qualified to serve in Crimson City had all been seriously tested in terms of loyalty. In addition, they did not go out on their own, so it was even more difficult for outsiders to find out about them. Even though the embroidered uniform guards seemed to be everywhere, they were unable to do anything in the face of such a disciplined army. Naturally, it was difficult for them to achieve any results. As for Yang Qindong's place, it was heavily guarded. Even the auxiliary troops could not get close. Only the elite cold vanguard, who had gone through many trials and tribulations, had the right to guard outside. Not to mention there were also the first and second guards, the elites of the elites. Under such heavy protection, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to investigate Yang Qindong's condition. The embroidered uniform guard had sent out many people, but most of them returned empty-handed. On the contrary, quite a few of them had gone missing. Zhou Xiang's words of incompetence expressed his helplessness toward Yang Qindong and the mercenaries. His words enraged Zhou Xian once again. Incompetent, incompetent. Do you not know what else to say other than this? Scram, scram. Yes. Seeing that Zhou Xian was enraged again, Zhou Xiang, who knew that accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, immediately knelt and left. Zhou Xian was the emperor of the Great Ming dynasty, second only to one and above all. He had inherited the legacy of his ancestors. But at the same time he had also inherited his ancestors' temperament, which was capricious. Who knew if he would punish Zhou Xiang in a fit of rage? Zhou Xiang left the hall and the other eunuchs lowered their heads, not daring to speak. Not long after, a heavy sigh filled the hall. No one knew what the so-called true dragon, the son of heaven, was thinking at this moment. Gaozhou Prefecture. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, sent 2 urgent secret letters to Emperor Ingzong, but he did not receive any reply even after a long time. At this time, extremely bad news spread over. The leader of the Heavenly Fortress camp, Miao Jinlong, who was given the title of Marquis by the Min King, was leading 80,000 troops from the Nanning Prefecture. The moment Kuang Yi received the news, he hurriedly summoned his generals to the front of the hall. At this moment, Ma Wei, Guan Ying, Yu Guang and the other generals all had ugly expressions. Below the hall, the scout general was reporting the battle reports he had received. Miao Jinlong's troops are very good at fighting. In terms of strength, they are second only to Yang Wenba of the Dumang stronghold. Since the start of the war, they had already taken over 4 cities and cities. Among them, the number of small counties that they had taken over was uncountable. Their army had also expanded from 10,000 people to 80,000 now. They are currently attacking the Lianzhou prefecture and are not far from us. How many people are there in the Lianzhou prefecture? Kuang Yi asked directly. Only 1,000. The scout general did not even dare to raise his head. Kuang Yi, who took in a cold breath, knew that Lianzhou could not be defended. 1,000 against 80,000, the result could be imagined. Report. Right at this moment, another scout entered the hall and whispered something into the ears of the general who was kneeling on the ground. The scout general's expression changed again and again. He then waved his hand and waited for his subordinates to leave. He said with a panicked expression, "I just received news that the general of the Lianzhou prefecture has surrendered." What? Kuang Yi, who had suddenly heard the latest battle report, staggered and fell to the side before losing his balance. Luckily, Guan Ying reacted quickly and stretched out his hands to catch him. He also anxiously shouted, "Teacher, teacher, are you okay?" I'm fine, I'm fine." Kuang Yi, who took in a strong breath, his chest heaved up and down a few times. Then he steadied himself and waved his hand at Guan Ying. Then he angrily scolded, "Bastards, a bunch of bastards. They received the kindness of the emperor and did not think of repaying it. They should be killed, their families should be wiped out, and their families should be wiped out." Kuang Yi angrily scolded. Unfortunately, the general of the Lianzhou prefecture could not hear him. Even if he heard it, he would not be afraid. After all, he had already surrendered. Who knew how long the South Ming could last? "Teacher, please calm down. Now that the Lianzhou prefecture has fallen, the next target will probably be our Gaozhou prefecture. As for how to deal with it, I need teacher to think." Guan Ying saw that Kuang Yi could stand up on his own and took 2 steps back. Deal with it. What else can we do? We have to defend the Gaozhou prefecture to the death. With me here we will not let these traitors take a step forward. Even though Savage Kuang was old, his voice was like thunder. Kuang Yi had made the decision to defend the city to the death. As a student, Guan Ying immediately cupped his hands and said, "Student is willing to follow teacher and defend the Gaozhou prefecture to the death." Guan Ying's words were heard by Ma Wei and Yu Guang. The two exchanged a glance before cupping their fists and saying, "We will follow the orders of the minister and defend Gaozhou prefecture to the death. We will fight to the death and not retreat." Ma Wei and Yu Guang did not have a choice. Even though they were in the Gaozhou prefecture, their families were not here. Their original place of defense was not Gaozhou. If they really surrendered like the Lianzhou prefecture general, once the news spread, their families would not be able to survive. Even if it was for the safety of their families, they had no other choice. Furthermore, with the minister of the Ministry of War here, even if they wanted to surrender, they had to be able to control the army. Hearing the words of the generals, Kuang Ye's expression became better. Good. His Majesty will definitely know of your loyalty. After we defeat the enemy this time, this official will definitely ask for rewards for all of you. Thank you, Minister. Guan Ying and the other two lowered their heads and cupped their hands. However, whether or not they would really listen to this so-called request for merit was another matter altogether. First they agreed. Then Kuang Yi wrote an urgent letter to be sent to Nanjing. After reporting the situation here, he looked at Guan Ying and the other two and said, "Immediately seal the city. At the same time, gather the youths in the city and help the soldiers defend the city." In the Gaozhou prefecture there were at least 40,000 people. Among them there were 5,000 youths. If used well, it would be a significant force. "Teacher, should we inform the Duke of Loyalty and ask him to come to the city to help us defend the city?" When Guan Ying saw that Kuang Yi didn't mention Yang Qindong, he thought that Kuang Yi was too anxious to remember, so he reminded him. We can just send someone to inform them. However, if they are not willing to enter the city, we cannot force them." Kuang Yi thought about Yang Qindong's request and shook his head as he said half-heartedly. He didn't think that the little fox Yang Qindong would be willing to help him defend Gaozhou prefecture before he received a confirmation. Outside the Gaozhou prefecture, in the mercenary camp near the Liezhou prefecture, the battle report from the front line had already been sent here. Yang Qindong naturally knew that Miao Jinlong had led the troops here. They are finally here? Yang Qindong's attitude was completely different from Kuang Ye's. When he heard this, he didn't panic at all. Instead, he looked as if he already knew this would happen. "Young master, are we going to beat them up?" Hu Mang, who was standing at the side, asked excitedly. From his words, it was not whether they should fight or not, but whether they should beat them up. Just this point alone showed how confident he was in winning. Actually, it was not only Tiger's Mane. The 7,000 young army soldiers all thought the same. The auxiliary soldiers of the Cold Front were even more so. With their advanced weapons, they could look down on the world and not reject any strong enemy. Even the temporary auxiliary soldiers were full of confidence after being trained for such a long time and learning excellent tactics. They only wanted to gain military merits in one battle and become an auxiliary soldier. They wanted to become a member of the elite Cold Vanguard as soon as possible and be envied by everyone. Chapter 429. Why do we have to fight? Yang Qindong tilted his head and asked after hearing Tiger's Mane's words. Tiger's Mane didn't know how to answer the young master's question. Fortunately, Yang Qindong didn't point at him to answer. Instead he said slowly, "Young master's goal was to force Zhu Xian to bow his head. Isn't the appearance of these people the best time to do so? If we chase them away right away, the problem will be solved. How can we force them to bow?" Yes, young master is right. Tiger's Mane is too naive. Tiger's Mane was smart. After being pointed out by Yang Qindong, he understood everything and immediately replied. "It's good that you know. Pass down the order. The camp will be in a defensive formation. Without orders, no one is allowed to leave the camp. Also, inform the logistics to prepare enough food and be prepared for a long standoff." Yang Qindong knew that Tiger's Mane wasn't the only one who wanted to send out troops. He was afraid that all the officers would have the same idea. Thus he passed down the order. Once a real and effective military order was formed, Leng Feng, who prioritized obeying orders, knew what to do. Just as Yang Qindong was passing down the order, Guan Ying came to the camp as a representative of Nanming. He wanted to meet Yang Qindong and invite him to Gaozhou Prefecture to avoid trouble. As expected, Guan Ying didn't even see Yang Qindong's face before Tiger's Mane sent him away. My young master's condition has worsened. He is not fit for any exercise. We appreciate Master Guan's kindness. We will stay here and guard the young master's body. When he recovers, we will leave. These words left Guan Ying speechless. He could only hope that after the Miao army arrived and failed to take down Gaozhou Prefecture, they would make an example out of these mercenaries. This way they could just sit back and watch the tigers fight. Gaozhou Prefecture and Yang Qindong's troops had all made defensive preparations. 3 days later, Miao Jinlong's 80,000 soldiers finally appeared in the southwest. Miao Jinlong was from the Miao tribe and was born in a big family. He had practiced martial arts since he was young and was familiar with the art of war. He had also seen many instances of the Ming dynasty's army bullying the Miao people. He had always wanted to fight for the rights of the Miao people one day and hold his head high. However, the great Ming dynasty was too powerful. How could the Miao tribe, who had a weak population and territory, contend against them? He originally thought that this was just a childhood dream that he would never be able to realize in his lifetime. But who knew that the situation changed so quickly? The prosperous Great Ming dynasty was divided into two. Then the king of Min raised his army. Miao Jinlong, who had been waiting, knew that the opportunity had come. He rose in revolt and became the first group of people in the Miao tribe to support the king of Min. He expressed his stance early and took practical actions. After a while, he gained the favor of the king of Min, Miao Jinlong, who was conferred the title of Marquis, led 10,000 Miao soldiers and was unstoppable. After winning every battle, the army grew stronger and stronger. Now they had 80,000 soldiers and became a very important force in the king of Min's faction. Some things, if you don't do it, you won't know. Maybe it was because he had been trapped in the Miao tribe for a long time. Miao Jinlong had always thought highly of the Ming dynasty. However, along the way he did not meet any opponents. Often when the army arrived, the city would fall by itself. Countless gold, silver, treasures, land, and beauties were at his fingertips. He finally saw what was called a real life, what was called a life of enjoyment. He also saw how the Ming dynasty, which was praised by others, could not withstand a single blow. After experiencing more, his horizons were broadened. Naturally, his heart grew bigger. Just as the king of Min's main force was still consolidating and absorbing the fruits of victory, Miao Jinlong could no longer hold back. After asking for instructions, he led the 80,000 soldiers and started to sweep through the entire Guangdong. Attacking the Lianzhou prefecture was just the beginning. His goal was to enter Gaozhou, Laizhou, Guanghai guards, and the southwest of the Guangzhou prefecture from Lianzhou. He wanted to be the vanguard to cooperate with the king of Min's main force to attack the Guangzhou prefecture. Lianzhou won the battle and the Lianzhou generals surrendered and opened the city. This seemed to be a good start. Miao Jinlong was overjoyed and led his troops to seize the city for a day. On the second day he went straight to Gaozhou prefecture. In his eyes, Guang prefecture was the only place to rest. The other prefectures were just steps to wealth and power. It was because of this idea that when the troops arrived at the Gaozhou prefecture, he sent people as usual to persuade them to surrender. The people were sent out, but only corpses returned. Guan Ying was ordered to kill the messenger with an arrow. This is so infuriating. How dare you kill the messenger? Men surround the city, attack the city. When Miao Jinlong saw the messenger's corpse, he could not help but be furious. He immediately ordered to prepare to attack the city. Bai King, please calm down. Just as the other generals in the tent were enraged and were about to fight to be the vanguard, a voice rang out in the tent. Then a man dressed in a long gown and dressed like a scholar walked out from the ranks. Mr. Zhou. Seeing the person who walked out, Miao Jinlong furrowed his brows. Then he relaxed and asked kindly, "Mister, why are you stopping me from sending troops?" "It is for the good of my king and all the generals." The man called Mr. Zhou said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Mr. Zhou's original name was Zhou Da. He was originally from Yunnan. Because he once offended a steward of the Marquis sheeping house, he was stripped of his scholar status. In a fit of anger he went to where the Miao people lived and married into their family, becoming the son-in-law of the Miao family. Because he was literate and knowledgeable, he was chosen by Miao Jinlong and kept by his side. Zhou was worthy of being called a scholar. He had contributed a lot to Miao Jinlong's plan along the way. Even when the Min King sent people to contact them, he was the first to stand up and support them. Zhou not only focused on attacking but also on attacking the heart. It was because of this that when he attacked the Lianzhou house he did not lose a single soldier and obtained a city. All of this made Miao Jinlong admire him. In addition, this person had been in the Miao family for 10 years and even had a few children. There was no problem with his loyalty and he was very trusted. When he saw that it was this person who stood out, he was not angry. Instead he asked kindly, "Let's hear it." Hearing that it was for his own good, Miao Jinlong asked with interest. Facing Miao Jinlong's amiable attitude and the angry expressions of the other generals, Zhou was neither servile nor overbearing. With a calm expression he said, "My king generals, you must remember that our ally in Guangdong Huang Yuliang was completely wiped out, right?" "Of course." Miao Jinlong nodded his head. Due to his identity he had never met young Master Huang or even his messenger. However, he knew that they had an ally in Guangdong. It was because of this ally that they were able to reduce the pressure on them in Yunnan, allowing them to achieve great things. "Then do you know why young Master Huang was defeated?" "Let me tell you, he was defeated by the Ming army in front of you," Zhou said with a very firm tone. The reason he knew this was mainly because he was good at gathering information. He was not like the ordinary Miao soldiers who only knew how to fight and fight. There was such a thing. Miao Jinlong, who was originally curious about what Zhou would say, could not help but change his expression when he heard this. He finally understood why Zhou did not agree to him attacking the city. "So what if there is?" Miao Jinlong did not speak, but it did not mean that his generals were afraid of anything. Among them, General Zhang Tsing said with a fearless tone. "That only proves that young Master Huang is too weak. If it were our Miao soldiers, we would definitely make the southern Ming army cry for their parents on the battlefield and know how powerful we are." "That's right, that's right." After the other generals heard Zhang Tsing's words, they all agreed. During this period of time they had dealt with and fought with the southern Ming army. However, the facts proved that this was just an army that looked strong on the outside but had ordinary combat strength. There was nothing to be afraid of. Huang Yuliang's defeat was definitely due to his own lack of strength. "No. You are all wrong." Faced with the unanimous opinion of so many generals, Zhou refuted with the strength of a weak scholar. "You all have only won a few battles, but you do not know that there is always someone stronger. Why don't you think about it? Since the Ming dynasty was able to conquer such a large country, how could they be weak? The reason why we aren't a match for them now is because our tempo is too fast. They weren't prepared and weren't able to adapt. However, once they are given enough time to deploy their troops, who can guarantee that we will continue to win? Not to mention, the ones who defeated young Master Huang weren't the Southern Ming Empire's army, but the most mysterious mercenaries that they spent a large sum of money to hire." Zhou did indeed understand a lot. This was also related to the education he received. It was precisely because he had read more books that he naturally had more knowledge and had more considerations. For example, studying the opponent was something that must be done. Mercenary army? When the generals heard this new name for the first time, they all looked at each other with a puzzled expression. Zhou did not expect them to understand anything. He only needed to tell them what he knew. As for what to do next, whether or not they had to continue attacking the city, it was not something that he could decide. Yes, it is the mercenary army. It was this army that once saved the life of the southern Ming Emperor, Yingzong's life on the battlefield. It was also this army that defeated the Walla cavalry that wanted to enter the capital of Baiming. It was also this army that defeated young Master Huang, who was very influential in Guangdong. These are their achievements after they made their debut. He spoke truthfully about everything that he knew. Then Zhou continued, "If we want to attack the city, we will definitely not be able to avoid them. How much confidence do we have? As for where to go, I ask my king and the generals to discuss this." Chapter 430. Zhou shut his mouth and did not want to argue with anyone about this matter. He was originally a Han Chinese, But because he was treated unfairly and could not survive, he came to the Miao tribe and became the son-in-law of the Miao tribe. A person like him actually had a very low social status. He couldn't even be considered the head of a family. How many people would think highly of him? If Miao Jinlong did not see that he did have some ability and put him in an important position, he would not be qualified to enter the tent for discussion, let alone argue with others. Zhou Xian shut his mouth, which made the others unable to find an object to argue with for a while. They all looked at King Miao Jinlong. The Miao tribe also had a very strict hierarchy, especially when it came to major matters such as the deployment of troops on the battlefield. The king's order was the final order. Everyone's eyes were on him, which made Miao Jinlong silent. Although it seemed that the journey was very smooth and the army was also growing step by step. From the original 10,000 people to the current 80,000 people, it was a strong army. However, no one knew better than Miao Jinlong about his own strength. The so-called expansion of the army was just these soldiers who were forced to join. Most of them joined the army to fill their stomachs, unlike the Miao family that he led in the beginning. They were born to conquer the world and be proud of the heroes. They did not even have a goal. Such an army could only fight a smooth battle. Once they encountered a tough opponent, they were likely to be heavily injured or even defeated. It was possible that they could lose their lives. The great Ming dynasty could occupy the world until now. If it was said that they did not have a capable army, even Miao Jinlong himself would not believe it. Just like now, didn't they encounter one? A head-on clash was far from what he wanted to see. Where there were people, there would be underworld. This saying was also applicable in the army. For any organization, no matter what the intention was, as long as time passed, factions would appear. It was something that could not be stopped. Unless the system was very strict, if there was a great soul leading the army, these problems could be suppressed. Just like the King of Min's faction now. Everyone treated the King of Min as the core, but it was undeniable that which general did not have their own thoughts? If you want to be respected by others, if you want to share the benefits, the prerequisite is to have enough strength. Only then will others respect you, value you, and not neglect you. How to expand their own strength while winning the battle, or at least to preserve their own strength, became the most important thing in the eyes of the kings. If everything was as Zhou Xian said, and the Ming army in front of them and the mercenaries in front of them were very powerful, then choosing such a tough opponent was originally an unwise thing. What was the meaning of winning if they used up all their forces and severely injure the enemy? It was just making a wedding dress for others. It was because of this desire to preserve their strength that Miao Jinlong listened to Zhou Xian's words. He then said to the generals looking at him, "Forget it, since the Ming army in front of us is not so easy to deal with. We do not need to make too many sacrifices. We will just surround them and wait for their morale to drop and surrender. How about this? We will first move out of Lizhou Prefecture and take the nearby cities. General Zhang, listen up, I will give you 10,000 troops. Go around Gaozhou Prefecture and take Lizhou City. Remember, if the Ming army does not take the initiative to stop you, do not casually provoke them. Think about the big picture, understand?" Miao Jinlong finally gave the order. He listened to Zhou Xian's suggestion and did not take a head-on approach. Instead, he only surrounded the city and lowered the enemy's morale first. Then he would have the opportunity to take Gaozhou Prefecture without bloodshed and complete his strategic mission. After the king gave the order, General Zhang Tsing stepped out to receive it. Not long after, the 10,000 Miao family soldiers rushed out of the camp and went around the border of Gaozhou Prefecture, heading straight for Lizhou Prefecture in the south. After the Miao army arrived, they did not immediately attack the city. Instead, they acted as if they were going to surround the city. This caused General Yu Guang, who had already prepared to defend Gaozhou City, to be puzzled. However, he soon found out from General Wei that it was probably because the enemy was afraid of the mercenaries. Yu Guang was still thinking about how powerful the mercenaries were. Just their name alone was enough to scare people into not daring to make a move. The Miao army actually started to move again. They went straight from Gaozhou Prefecture to the mercenaries' camp 5 li south. Don't tell me they want to attack the mercenaries first? But it seems like they only have 10,000 troops. Is that even useful? The deputy general beside Yu Guang voiced out his doubts while revealing an expression of disbelief. Idiot, they are probably going to attack Lizhou Prefecture. Yu Guang glared at the deputy general beside him with an expression that said, "You are really stupid." Then he quickly sent someone to report this news to the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was waiting in the government office. 5 li south of Gaozhou Prefecture, the mercenaries' camp. When the scouts noticed that the Miao army was moving towards their camp, they quickly reported it. Tiger's Mane did not dare to delay after hearing the news. He ordered Luopo and the others to prepare for battle while rushing to the large tent where the young master was resting. At this moment Yang Chendong was very satisfied. He was enjoying the fruits that the 2 ladies fed him. If he wanted to eat bananas he would have them peeled and delivered to his mouth. If he wanted to eat grapes he would have them washed and delivered to his mouth. Even if he wanted to eat apples he would have them peeled and delivered to his mouth. With beauties by his side and delicious food in front of him, Yang Chendong could not help but feel like he was not thinking about the world anymore. Fortunately, in his previous life, in order to complete all kinds of missions he had taken on all kinds of roles. In order to complete the missions he had to act like he was. He could really endure hardships and enjoy blessings. Everything in front of him was just child's play. He could not lose Yang Chendong's nature. Outside the large tent, hurried footsteps could be heard, followed by Tiger's Mane's anxious voice. "Young master, the Miao army is moving. They are rushing towards our direction." Although his voice was a little hurried he was not panicked. It was obvious that Yang Chendong had already prepared for this kind of situation. It was very simple. If someone attacked then they just had to fight back. After Tiger's Mane reported he respectfully stood in place. After a few breaths of time, the large tent was opened from the inside. Yang Chendong, dressed in green, walked out with a serious expression. "Let's go, we will go take a look at this Miao army." The intelligence had described the Miao people and the Miao army more than once, but he had never seen them with his own eyes. With the idea of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy, Yang Chendong decided to personally take a look. The Miao army was indeed heading straight for the mercenaries' camp. When they were only 2 li away they suddenly turned and passed by. This obviously provocative action caused many of the cold vanguard soldiers who had already gripped their spears to glare angrily. Some of the soldiers even turned their heads to look at the platoon leaders and company commanders beside them. Their intention to fight was very obvious. Ever since the mercenaries were established, they had shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. What the people of the Great Ming Dynasty knew was that they first saved Emperor Yingzong on the battlefield, then defeated Walla's elite cavalry, then fought bravely against the Huang bandits and quelled the rebellion in Guangdong. Each and every one of them had the aura of being invincible the moment Leng Feng was unleashed. How could such a proud army allow others to provoke them? Keep your eyes on the target. Without orders no one is to act rashly. Otherwise prepare to retire early. The company commanders and platoon leaders who were being stared at by those cold gazes naturally felt the pressure. They were extremely dissatisfied, but it was the duty of a soldier to obey orders. This was especially true for those who joined the Cold Front. Obeying orders was an extremely important task for them. Even if there were no orders from above, they could not evade the enemy's spear even if it pierced their chest. This was the most basic requirement to become an iron army, a strong army. Without orders to attack, the Cold Front, including some of the auxiliary soldiers who were ready for the second attack, could only watch as the 10,000-strong Miao army brushed past them. Speaking of which, the distance between the two sides was only about 300 meters. Those with good eyesight could even see the facial features of the other side. Therefore they could see the mocking gazes of the Miao soldiers. "General, it seems like these so-called mercenaries are nothing more than this. We are already so close to them, but I don't see a single brave soldier daring to rush out of the camp to find trouble with us. It seems like they don't live up to their name." Some of the junior leaders in the Miao army gathered together and laughed. General Zhang Zheng, who was riding on a horse and walking in the middle of the group, also laughed when he heard the discussion of his subordinates. "That's right, they don't even have the courage to walk out of the camp. In my eyes they are just a bunch of cowards. Once we take down Lijiao Prefecture, I will naturally tell the king to start with these mercenaries. Haha, I want to see what that scholar Zhou has to say when the time comes." "General, you're wise." The group of junior leaders hurriedly flattered. Following that, the 10,000-strong Miao soldiers walked past the mercenaries' camp with high morale. Each of them seemed to walk with their heads held high, as if they were extremely arrogant. "Young master, it seems like they don't have any intentions of attacking us. They are going to Lijiao Prefecture. However, there is no one there. The city is also empty. What are they going to do there? Hu Mang watched as the 10,000 Miao soldiers walked past the front of the military camp. After walking for 2 hours in a grandiose manner, he saw through their purpose. Chapter 431. Hearing Tiger's Mane's puzzled question, Yang Chendong nodded and said, "Yes, we know that Lizhou Prefecture is an empty city, but others don't know that. What will they do when they find out that there is no one there?" Tiger's Mane was originally listening to Yang Chendong's words, but when there was suddenly no more, he asked in confusion, "What do we do?" "Yes, what do we do? This young master is asking you a question." Yang Chendong nodded and looked at Tiger's Mane seriously. Tiger's Mane saw that Yang Chendong was testing him, so he quickly racked his brains. However, perhaps because of the suddenness of the situation or perhaps because of his nervousness, he couldn't come up with a reason. He could only stammer, "Young master, Tiger's Mane is slow-witted, he doesn't know what will happen next." A long sigh with disappointment in his eyes. Tiger's Mane was good at everything, but he was used to relying on himself. How could he be entrusted with important tasks in the future? The good thing was that he liked Tiger's loyalty and complete obedience to orders. As for his shortcomings, he would become stronger with more practice. "Alright then, young master will tell you. When I looked at the Miao army just now, they were very arrogant, as if they didn't put us or any other army in their eyes. Usually such an army's morale is very high and they won't be too weak in battle. However, they often have a fatal flaw, and that is arrogance. On the battlefield, if they are too arrogant and don't put their opponents in their eyes, the consequences will be very serious, and they may even lose their lives." Yang Chendong's voice was still echoing in the air. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Luo Pe and the other regiment and battalion officers all had a thoughtful expression on their faces. They also seemed to be wondering if their own army was too arrogant. Would they also make the mistake of underestimating the enemy? Seeing that everyone was deep in thought, Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a satisfied expression. It was almost impossible for an army to remain undefeated for its entire life. There were too many factors involved, such as morale, willpower, advanced weapons, whether the commanding general gave the correct orders, whether the soldiers were united, whether they were brave, whether they dared to risk their lives on the battlefield, and even factors such as the right time, location, people, whether they had a good reason for their actions, whether they were righteous, whether the army had a soul, whether the soldiers had faith, whether the soldiers were of the same mind, and so on and so forth. It could be said that victory in this war was not determined by who had more people or whose weapons were more advanced. It was just like during the war's war, of course. Our armies is main was main was main's main. This was his main was main e main. The cold front had too many advantages. For example, their advanced weapons, strict training, strict military laws, and uniform thinking and behavior among the soldiers. However, this did not mean that every battle could be won. Changes were ever present. How to deal with and resolve these sudden changes was also the key to victory. Beating them down was even more necessary. A person could have a lofty and unyielding character, but he couldn't have an arrogant heart. Otherwise, he would fall sooner or later. It was just a matter of time. Using today's opportunity, Yang Chendong was knocking on the heads of the various regimental and battalion-level officers. Seeing that everyone was deep in thought and understood his intentions, he continued, "A proud army will never return empty-handed. However, an operation without a goal or plan was often the cause of failure. Take this 10,000 Miao army for example. If they return empty-handed after going to Lizhou Prefecture and reunite with the Miao army's main force, then even if they fail, they will not be at fault. On the other hand, if their arrogance is at play and they want to take something back to deal with us, then their calculations will be wrong, and the consequences will be very serious." "Young master, are you saying that when the Miao army returns empty-handed they will attack us? But isn't that a little too bold?" Tiger's Mane finally understood the meaning behind Yang Chendong's words and asked with a face of disbelief. These words came from Yang Chendong's mouth. If it was anyone else, Tiger's Mane would not have believed it and would even say that the other party was just trying to scare them. "Are you brave? Ever since they left Yunnan, they have not met any opponents. How can such an army not be proud? What's so strange about them making some bold moves?" Yang Chendong said all of this confidently. He only needed to confirm that the 10,000 Miao army would definitely attack them. Since Yang Qindong had said so, Tiger's Mane immediately said excitedly, "Young master, then let's prepare properly and teach them a lesson when they come." Yes, preparation is a must. However, there's no need to be too nervous. Didn't Gao Xiong bring some newly developed mines from the munitions factory when he came? Bury some of them. If they dare to come, let them know what it means to scatter flowers from heaven. Yang Qindong was not completely sure that the 10,000 Miao army would attack them. Before he had any definite information, there was no need to make the soldiers so nervous. All he needed to do was to bury the mines and prepare for defense. If they really came, the effect would be surprisingly good. When the Lengfeng army attacked together, the 10,000 Miao army would basically be useless. Yes. Yang Qindong's words were equivalent to an order. The 2nd Regiment commander of the Lengfeng army, Luo Po, who had been standing at the side for a long time, immediately nodded in agreement. Then he watched as the young master left. However, they did not leave even after a long time. Instead, after Luo Po and political commissar Kong Jia had a discussion, they decided to pass on Yang Qindong's words to every battalion, company and platoon leader. They wanted to let them know that it was okay to have pride, but having pride would easily lead to failure. At the same time, they also discussed some actions that might be needed to take in the upcoming events. Since the 6th young master said that the Miao army would attack them because of their victory, it did not matter if it would happen or not. The necessary preparations must be made. Previously, when Gao Xiong brought a ship to Laizhou Prefecture to pick them up, he brought a lot of guns, ammunition and crossbows. Now they were all equipped and brought into the army. Every Lengfeng army was also equipped with 5 bullets. It was enough to deal with some large battles. However, no one knew what would happen next. No one knew when the next replenishment of ammunition would be. In order to ensure that there was enough ammunition, Luo Po suggested that unless absolutely necessary, it was best to use cold weapons first. This was perhaps the Lengfeng army's weakness. Without air transportation or even ground transportation, ammunition became a huge problem. Even if Yang Qindong was around and they could retrieve the items from the warehouse at any time, they couldn't do such a thing unless it was absolutely necessary. It wasn't like they could find a good excuse every time something happened, not to mention that there was only one Yang Qindong, but there was more than one cold front team now. Political commissar Kong Jia agreed with Luo Po's suggestion and the Lengfeng army began to get busy. First they dug the mines. In order to prevent others from seeing them, they worked in the dark. At the same time, other than Lengfeng Wuxing's 4 companies of the 1st Battalion who were still using advanced firearms, the other 2 battalions' 8 companies, a total of 800 Lengfeng soldiers, also took out their sharp bayonets and prepared for close combat. Using the words of 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin, they wanted to show the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers that even in the face of cold weapons, the valiance of the cold front was unrivaled. Southern Ming capital Nanjing Prefecture. Kuang Yi rushed all the way here and finally placed it in front of Zhu Qian's dragon desk. When he heard what Kuang Yi said, that Miao Jinlong and his army of 80,000 had started to head south, and after taking over the Lianzhou Prefecture, they headed straight for the Gaozhou Prefecture, Zhu Qian could no longer remain calm. According to his thoughts and the analysis of some of the court officials, Min Min and Min Min had already taken over Min Min. The king of Min had just obtained most of the territories in Yunnan, Guangxi and Guangdong. It was time to stop and digest them. At least in the short term there should not be any military action. However, it seemed that they had underestimated the enemy's appetite and ambition. In the court, when the officials heard the news, they all panicked. Especially the newly appointed left assistant minister Chen Rian. He was so nervous that he was sweating profusely. Kuang Yi was not in court. The former left assistant minister Wang Ji had misjudged the situation and had been arrested and interrogated. However, because he was still in Shiping Manor in Yunnan and because the road back was full of King of Min's rebel army, he was not immediately taken back to Jingdou for interrogation. With the loss of 2 important figures, Chen Rian was promoted to the position of left assistant minister and also to manage the affairs of the Ministry of War. Normally, Chen Rian would be overjoyed to receive such a position. However, in such a dangerous situation, taking over the Ministry of War was like taking over a mess. How could he not be frustrated? Luckily, Chen Rian was quite capable. In fact, in history he had once held the position of Minister of War. Even if the situation was a little dangerous, with his strong ability he had come up with some good countermeasures. For example, when the entire southern Ming dynasty started to recruit soldiers, any male between 16 and 40 years old could sign up. The requirement was that each family had to send one person. If there were more and they were willing to join the army, one person could pay a year's worth of taxes. Once the world was peaceful, these people would not be recorded in the army and could regain their freedom. They could choose to do farming or business. Chapter 432. Qin Rian's policy was very good, and it attracted a large number of people to join the army. Statistics showed that the newly recruited soldiers in the southern Ming Empire had reached 1 million. This was because the financial pressure of the Ministry of Revenue was too great. Otherwise, it would not be difficult to double this number. This was the benefit of having a strong foundation. It had to be said that the Great Ming Empire was still very powerful. If it was not for the appearance of Yang Qindong, it would be like history. It would not be a big problem to continue for a few hundred years. The actions of the Ministry of Military Personnel were seen by Zhou Xian of Yingzhong, and he praised them twice. Now they only needed to wait for the training of these recruits to be completed before they could enter the battlefield. With so many fresh troops, it would not be a problem to wipe out the King of Min's rebel army. But at this time the King of Min's faction, who was estimated to be biding their time, made a move. If they could not be effectively controlled, it would not take long for them to reach out for a yard after getting an inch. The other rebel army would follow suit. It was afraid that before the training of the recruits was completed, the King of Min's faction would kill their way to the front of Nanjing Prefecture. The southern Ming Empire's regime might face the danger of ending. With the danger of the country being destroyed, how could Zhou Xian not be anxious? With a trace of blood in his eyes, he looked at the officials in the court. Dear officials, is there any way to control the situation? It doesn't need too long. It can last for a year. 9 months is enough. Zhou Xian asked anxiously, but what he got was silence. These officials could usually speak some reason or even twisted reason when they encountered problems. In the face of military affairs, the officials now had a very good interpretation of what it meant to be a scholar meeting a soldier. In the face of the King of Min's faction, who did not talk reason at all, it seemed that any method was useless. Just like 2 days ago, the Minister of Rights, Lu Da, had proposed that they should first negotiate with the King of Min. Of course, this kind of negotiation was fake. The real thing was to stabilize the situation and delay time. Although this policy made Zhou Xian somewhat unhappy, considering that it could maintain the situation and buy more time to prepare, he gritted his teeth and agreed. But who would have thought that when Lu Da solemnly arranged for someone to do this, the envoy sent out a firm refusal before he even arrived in front of Prince of Min. Under such favorable circumstances, with the cooperation of Jiaozhi and Miao Jun, only a fool would agree to sit down and negotiate with the southern Ming Empire. The standard of negotiation was that everyone's strength was equal, and no one could do anything to the other. Only then could such a method be used. When one party's power was too great, it would be difficult to negotiate. It was precisely because the method had already been tried that all of the officials shut their mouths, looking as if they were unable to come up with a solution. In fact, it wasn't that there was no way. At least there were 2 paths in front of Zhou Xian. First, they had to take the initiative to submit to Baiming, and then cede a few provinces in a peaceful situation. This way they would be able to obtain the help of Zhu Qiyu, the acting head of Baiming. Then he could borrow troops to destroy the King of Min's faction. Second, they had to agree to Kuang Ye's condition of giving Yang Qindong the throne. This way, as long as the mercenaries were willing to help, even if they couldn't immediately suppress the King of Min's rebellion, they could buy enough time. After the training of the new recruits was completed, the southern Ming Empire would be at peace. However, Zhou Xian didn't want to choose the first of these 2 paths. His cousin had seized the throne while the other party was in a precarious position. This had already made him very unhappy. If Yang Shan had not suddenly disobeyed him and disappeared, he would not have acknowledged the fact that the other party was Emperor Baiming even now. If he lowered his head now, wouldn't it prove that he was inferior to the other party? If that was the case, people who didn't know the situation would think that the other party was the legitimate one. This was definitely not what Zhou Xian wanted to see. Even now he still wanted to kill his way to the southern Ming Empire and unify the great Ming Empire. Wouldn't this be his own goal and hope? As for the second point, Zhu Xian also didn't want to give Yang Qindong the title of king with a different surname. Yang Qindong was really too outstanding. He was so outstanding that Zhu Xian was very afraid of him. If taking the first path was to end one's own future goal, then choosing the second path was to end one's own grave. Yang Qindong was only 21 years old and he was already given the title of king with a different surname. If he still needed him in the future, how would he reward him? Could it be that he had to give up the throne? Moreover, once he was given the title of king with a different surname, it would easily create a situation where he couldn't get rid of his subordinates. If he wanted to solve this problem in the future, he didn't know how much he would have to pay. As for what the genie guard said about Yang Qindong's poor health and being poisoned, Zhu Xian didn't dare to fully believe it. Yang Qindong had given him too many surprises, so it was reasonable that he couldn't fully believe it. This led to the gathering of the ministers, wanting to see if any of them could come up with a better idea. But now Zhu Xian was somewhat disappointed. Incompetent, incompetent. He cursed in his heart. Zhu Xian had to choose the lesser of two evils. It was time for him to make a decision. In the end, his heart was biased toward the second choice. Forget it and the court. The 6 ministers and the imperial censor stay behind to discuss matters in the side hall. Zhu Xian called the several important officials to the side hall. Naturally, there was only one matter, and that was to discuss the matter of giving Yang Qindong the title of king. Since no one could think of a better idea, they could only consider this matter. Fortunately, Mu Bin had been given the title of king with a different surname before. This wasn't the first time he had done such a thing. In other words, it wasn't the first time he had lost face. So what if it happened again? Those who could become important officials were all quick-witted and good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to keep their positions. When Zhu Xian summoned them, they all guessed the emperor's intention. So when they entered the side hall, they all lowered their heads and didn't speak. Obviously, no one wanted to mention this matter first to avoid tarnishing their reputation. Cough. Sitting on the golden dragon throne, Zhu Xian's expression was a bit ugly. Seeing that no one spoke, he coughed lightly to attract everyone's attention. But in the eyes of the ministers who had weathered countless storms, this was completely useless. Even the left assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, Chen Ruyan, who represented Kuang Yi, lowered his head in silence. It was as if there was a beautiful scenery under his feet. He couldn't move his eyes or raise them at all. Seeing everyone's reaction, Zhu Xian was displeased. Although he knew that whoever spoke of this matter would be looked down upon in the history books, someone had to do it. Could it be that he, the emperor, had to do it himself? Did he think that what he did in the history books wasn't shameful enough? The emperor was the emperor. Since the officials didn't take the initiative to speak, he would call them out one by one. He thought, you forced me to do this. When Zhu Xian spoke, the first person he called out was the Minister of History, Chen Sun. Beloved official Chen, as the Minister of Personnel, you should have a reputation for discerning people. Is there any way to resolve the current situation? Since ancient times, the Ministry of Personnel had a saying that officials were one level higher than officials. As the Minister of Personnel, who was in charge of the promotion, evaluation, and recommendation of officials, he was often described as the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel. Usually, as long as he had enough experience, he would be the leader of the officials. Immediately calling out Chen Sun's name showed that he didn't have any intention of picking on the weak. He was really forcing everyone to state their position. Especially when he said that he had a reputation for discerning people, Chen Sun couldn't refuse. This also made Minister Chen, who was standing there, suffer. Although Zhu Xian's words were gentle, if one carefully thought about the meaning behind them, as long as one wasn't a fool, one could sense the threat. Perhaps Zhu Xian was giving the officials a choice. Either they said what he wanted to say, or they could only accept some infamy. Or they could take it head-on and be prepared to lose their position. One was fame and the other was benefits. They had to choose one. They couldn't take all the benefits. Chen Sun's expression was very ugly. He was in a complicated struggle, considering what to do. What to say? What kind of gains and losses would there be? Your Majesty, this official has something to say. Just as Chen Sun was thinking about how to respond to the emperor, the Minister of Rites, Lu De, finally spoke. He held his ceremonial tablet and took a step forward. Originally, Zhou Xian was about to get angry and give Qin Sun a good beating. He might even find a reason to remove him from his position. However, Lu De suddenly stood up. This made Zhou Xian happy. Thinking that he still had loyal officials by his side, he did his best to make his expression as good as possible. Beloved official Lu, what do you have to say? Yes, Your Majesty. Lu De nodded and lowered his cupped hands. Then with a calm gaze he said, Your Majesty, the situation in the southwest is chaotic. It's about to spread. Our army still needs some time to train. As the saying goes, distant water can't quench a present thirst. In this official's opinion, it's better to appoint a king with a different surname and have him lead the army in battle to protect the Great Ming's future. Not only did Lu De stand up, but he also took the initiative to talk about the appointment of a king. This made Zhou Xian very happy. Beloved official Lu's words are very much to our liking. Many thanks, Your Majesty. After Lu De received the praise, he quickly put on a humble appearance. Then he continued, It's just that the appointment of a king is a big matter. In this official's opinion, we must not be rash, especially the Duke of Loyalty. He once served Baiming Daizong. Now his family is also there. For such a big matter we must first discuss it with them. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we won't be recognized by everyone in the world and it will be easier for trouble to arise. Hearing Lu De's sudden new question, Zhou Xian nodded thoughtfully and said, Beloved official Lu's words are very reasonable. Then in your opinion what should be the explanation? Your Majesty, we should first send someone to discuss this matter with Daizong. As long as both sides reach a consensus, the appointment of a king with a different surname can be carried out and the people of the world won't talk about it. Therefore, this official is willing to ask Your Majesty to give the Ministry of Rites some time. This official will immediately send someone to do it. As for the Duke of Loyalty, we can first notify him to lead the army to retreat. After he resolves the rebellion, presumably the matter of the appointment of a king will be settled. It'll be a good time to confer the title. This way both sides won't be delayed. Chapter 433. It was as if Lu De had already thought of a countermeasure. As he spoke without hesitation. When the conditions were right, success would come naturally. That's true. Zhou Xian nodded after Lu De's explanation. However, a few more questions popped up. He couldn't help but ask, if that's the case, will the Duke of Zhongdan be willing? Also, how confident are you in convincing Baiming? In Zhou Xian's opinion, they couldn't truly be bestowed the title of king. What if Yang Qindong didn't agree? Also, the Southern Ming Empire had no choice but to be bestowed the title of king. Baiming wouldn't suffer any losses. Would they be willing to admit it? At the very least, if it was him, he probably wouldn't agree. For example, Yang Qindong was the Duke of Zhongdan. Even now, Baiming's officials still referred to him as the Duke of Zhongdan. Since Lu De had stood up and made such a suggestion, it was natural that he had thought about these problems long ago. When he heard Zhou Xian's question, he smiled and said, Your Majesty, there's no need to worry. Since Your Majesty has already bestowed the title, if the Duke of Zhongdan isn't satisfied, once the news spreads, I'm afraid everyone will rise up and criticize him. Sometimes spittle can drown people. I'm sure the Duke of Zhongdan knows this very well. As for whether Baiming will agree or not, Your Majesty, that's not a problem we need to consider. If they don't agree, you can tell the Duke of Zhongdan and let him deal with it. In short, Your Majesty is wise. Lu De didn't say what if. However, Zhou Xian already understood. If Baiming didn't approve of the title of king, Yang Qindong would definitely be very angry. This was a good opportunity to drive a wedge between them. If things didn't go well, it was possible for both sides to fight. At that time he would really be able to reap the benefits. Thinking that if Yang Qindong and Baiming were to fight to the death, it would be a chance for the South Ming Empire to rise again. Immediately, his face lit up with joy as he said, Beloved official Lu is indeed worthy of being this subject's backbone. Good. Everything will be done according to your wishes. Chao Jixiang drafted a decree for me. Originally, he was still having a headache over the fact that he had to confer another king with a different surname. This was equivalent to selling the country of his ancestors. Even if one day he became strong again and took everything back, who knew how the history books would record this matter, and whether the future generations would scold him. But after hearing Lu Da's words, the bad thing became a good thing. He didn't need to pay any price to solve the problem. He even made a strong enemy for Baiming. Such a brilliant plan made him very satisfied. Now that Zhou Xian was satisfied, the ministers were free to leave. As Lu Da walked among them, he could clearly see that the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zue, was looking at him with disdain. Yang Qindong had once saved Wang Zue's life on the battlefield. This was something that everyone knew. A while ago, Yang Qindong and Lu Da had quarreled over the matter of Hangzhou's prefectural magistrate Shen Buqi. This was something that everyone knew. Just from this aspect alone, the two of them already disliked each other. However, this was not the main problem. The main problem was that Lu Da's words today were clearly plotting against Yang Qindong. Even though there were only a few important ministers present, today's conversation would definitely be recorded in the history books. Presumably, Zhou Xian would be the first to speak of this matter, so as to prevent the future generations from placing such a scheme on him. In this way, the matter of Lu Da plotting against Yang Qindong would naturally be spread soon. At that time, given the personality of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, would he forgive Lu Da? This was why there was a trace of disdain in Wang Zue's eyes when he looked at him. In his opinion, if he wanted to use Yang Qindong, he should use him well. He should use his emotions and reason with him. There was no need to worry that he would not do his best for the imperial court and the South Ming Empire. After all, from Wang Zue's point of view, Yang Qindong was still a minister of the great Ming Empire. It was just a coincidence that he met the mercenaries. However, if he was plotted against like this, it would be a different story. The consequences would be very serious. Wang Zue's gaze towards Lu Da was somewhat complicated, even somewhat disdainful. However, there was also someone who looked at him with gratitude. That was the Minister of Personnel, Chen Sun. Just now, if Lu Da had not spoken up in time, he would have either left a mark on the history books and be criticized by others, or he would have been hated by the emperor. He did not know what kind of end he would end up in. Lu Da's words could be considered to have saved his life at a crucial time. Thank you, Brother Lu. Chen Sun clasped his hands gratefully. While he was speaking, the Minister of Justice Xiao Chua and the Minister of Works Jiang Yuan also walked over. Lu Da knew how to conduct himself. Among the 6 ministers, he had united 3 of them. They were Chen Sun, Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan. Originally, he wanted to pull Imperial Censor Shang Lu into their camp. However, the position of Imperial Censor was too important. He had the responsibility of supervising hundreds of officials. Such a position meant that he could not participate in other people's camps. Otherwise, he would definitely be suspected by the emperor. He would not be far from being dismissed or even punished. In other words, among the 6 ministers, other than Minister Kuang Yi of the Ministry of War and Minister Wang Zue of the Ministry of Revenue, the other 4 ministers had already formed a group. Coincidentally, these 4 ministers did not have any close relationship with Yang Qindong. On the contrary, because of Lu Da, there was some estrangement between them. Everyone saw what happened just now. Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan saw how Lu Da spoke up to save Chen Sun at the crucial moment. They admired Lu Da for being fearless and not caring about his reputation. Now they walked over to express their goodwill. Lu Da naturally noticed the approach of these 2 people and immediately had a plan in mind. He chuckled and said, "Brother Chen, what are you talking about? We are originally one. It can be said that when one person's glory, everyone's glory. When one person's loss, everyone's loss. This is what I should do." Goodwill said. Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan could not help but nod to express their appreciation. Because of this, the friendship between the 4 of them seemed to have become even closer. It was obvious that with them around, Yang Qindong's wish to be conferred the title of king would be very difficult. The mercenary camp outside Gaozhou Prefecture City. It had been 5 days since Miao Jun passed through here. At noon on this day, the scouts from Lengfeng reported that the 10,000 Miao soldiers had returned. They would most likely pass by Lengfeng's camp in the evening. When the news spread, many people in Lengfeng's camp were eager to show off their skills. Now they only hoped that Miao Jun would impulsively attack the mercenaries and give them a chance to show off. Just as Yang Qindong expected, General Zhang Tseng, who led the team on the way back, had been considering whether to attack the mercenaries or not. Originally they had vowed to attack Lizhou Prefecture City, wanting to break through and achieve great merit. However, he never thought that when he really went there he would see an empty city. Not only that, they did not see anything valuable in the city. This meant that they had returned without achieving anything. This made Zhang Tseng, who had finally managed to get this job, feel depressed. Since the day of Miao Jun's uprising, he had been sweeping away everything in his path as if he had entered a no-man's land. Whenever he encountered an enemy, it was like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. When had there ever been a time like this where he had mobilized so many people, yet there was not even the slightest bit of gain? If they went back like this, they would probably be laughed at by their colleagues. No, we definitely cannot go back like this, Zhang Tsing said in his heart. However, if he wanted to return with great merit, it seemed that he could only choose to attack the mercenaries. Scholar Zhou's words cannot be completely trusted. He is originally a Han Chinese, a citizen of the Great Ming Dynasty. Who knows what he is thinking? Before he decided to take action, Zhang Tsing convinced himself in his heart. Then he sent out scouts to check on the situation of the mercenary camp with the excuse of going back to report the news. Zhang Tsing was quite careful, at least he knew to observe the situation before taking action. Thus, the scouts he sent out openly passed by the mercenaries' camp and headed towards the Miao army's main camp in Gaozhou Prefecture City. Originally, the defense of Leng Feng's camp had always been very strict. Usually one could see squads of soldiers patrolling back and forth. However, ever since they used the night to plant mines outside the camp, they naturally relaxed a lot. This time, in order to lure the enemy to attack, they purposely relaxed on the outside but tightened on the inside. Wherever outsiders could see, the soldiers would appear very lazy. However, in the depths of the camp where no one could see, the training was still very strict. In this way, the Miao army scouts who seemed to be passing by but were actually investigating the situation fell for the trap and reported the mercenaries' performance to Zhang Tseng. Hearing that the mercenaries were so careless, Zhang Tseng was overjoyed. He felt that this was a great opportunity given to him by the heavens. He immediately sent his trusted aide to the Miao army's main camp and reported that he wanted to take advantage of the situation to attack the mercenaries. He also listed out his reason, which was that the mercenaries were too careless and this was the perfect time to take them down. The trusted aide quickly passed by the mercenaries' camp again. After observing for a while and confirming that the scout's report was correct, he went to the Miao army's main camp and met with King Miao Jinlong. He then told him of his general's plan. Attack the mercenaries' camp? Hearing the report, Miao Jinlong, who was originally sitting at the head of the table, was suddenly energized. However, when he repeated this sentence, he did not forget to look at Scholar Zhou, the most cultured person in the camp. Zhou was originally listening attentively. It must be said that he was indeed smart. When he heard the scout report that General Zhang Tseng had led the troops to Lizhou Prefecture without any success, he had already predicted that the journey back would not be peaceful. Now that he heard the trusted aide that Zhang Tseng sent back say this, he sighed in his heart. Zhou would not believe what the scout said about the mercenaries' camp being lax and the soldiers slacking off without any morale. Chapter 434. Since they were able to wipe out the Huang bandit army, which was a huge headache for the southern Ming Empire, how could such an army be as weak as described? If that was the case, it could only prove that the other party had ulterior motives. Or rather, they were just putting on an act and waiting for others to attack. Although Zhou had these thoughts in his mind, he did not intend to argue. The strength of the mercenary army was not something that he could rely on. Perhaps it was only when he was rebuffed and suffered losses that others would believe his words. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Therefore, when Miao Jinlong looked at him, he did not object firmly and only expressed his opinion. My king, the mercenary army should not be as weak as they appear to be. I'm afraid there's a trap. A trap? The news said that they only have 7,000 people. General Zhang Tsing's army has 10,000 people. Including us, we have 80,000 people. So what if there's a trap? Miao Jinlong saw that Zhou's attitude was still calm and tried to persuade him. Zhou only expressed his opinion and said what he thought. Since others did not believe him, there was nothing he could do. He did not say anything and looked as though he would not change his opinion. Therefore, when faced with Miao Jinlong's second question, he did not say anything. Since even Zhou did not say anything, Miao Jinlong felt that his idea of sneaking into the camp was a good one. After all, if they could take down the mercenary army in one battle, Gaozhou Prefecture would be broken through. He would have made a great contribution along the way and would be able to reach the Guangzhou Prefecture. From there, he would be able to control and occupy the entire Guangdong Prefecture. With an idea in mind and no one standing out to object, Miao Jinlong immediately waved his hand and said to the personal guard sent by Zhang Zeng, "Tell your general to choose to attack the mercenaries tonight. This king will send troops to support you. At the same time, I will also send troops to keep an eye on Gaozhou Prefecture so that they won't be able to come out to help." Yang Qindong was still chatting with First Madam Hu Yan and Third Madam Snow Lady in the tent. To him, chatting with his wives was the best way to relax. Report. Tiger's Mane's voice came from outside the tent. "Come in." Yang Qindong straightened his body. He knew that something must have happened. Otherwise, Tiger's Mane wouldn't have come to disturb him at this time. Yang Qindong's guess was right. Tiger's Mane had indeed come to inform him of the changes in Miao Jun's troops. "Young master, the 10,000 Miao soldiers who were returning to their camp have suddenly slowed down their speed. I've asked someone to calculate it. Based on their current speed, it's very likely that they'll reach our camp after midnight." Slow down. Yang Qindong couldn't help but chuckle when he heard this sudden change that could also be said to be a logical change. That day, Yang Qindong saw the Miao army walk past his camp in an extremely arrogant manner. He thought that this army was too proud and arrogant, and it was very likely that there would be people who were not content and would be like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Thus, he ordered the scouts to keep a close eye on them. At the same time, the camp was prepared to take precautions. However, all of this was just a guess, a feeling, or an inference based on experience. It couldn't be considered as the truth. However, with this information from Tiger's Mane, it was completely different. As everyone knew, once an army that had left the camp was on the way back, the soldiers would be anxious to return home. Their speed would only be faster and not slower. Just like these 10,000 Miao soldiers, their desire to return to their camp should be very strong. Thus their speed should be very fast. Not to mention that they should have reached their camp before dinner. Even if they were a little later, their speed should have been faster. How could they suddenly be pushed back and only arrive at his camp in the middle of the night? If that was really the case, wouldn't it be better for them to have a good night's rest and return to camp early the next morning? Just from this point alone, it was obvious that the other party's intentions were clear. "How's the Miao army's camp?" Yang Qindong asked out of caution. Reporting to young master, the scouts monitoring there reported that nothing unexpected happened. "Everything seems to be normal." Tiger's Mane replied truthfully. "Everything is normal. That's the most abnormal thing. Think about it, if the army is really returning to camp, wouldn't the camp need to make some preparations? Seeing that the enemy is near, it's very reasonable for them to send out troops to welcome them. However, they didn't do anything which exposed their intentions." Yang Qindong gave a very certain answer after analyzing the situation. Originally, Tiger's Mane didn't understand why normal was abnormal. However, after listening to Yang Qindong's analysis, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Young master was indeed the young master. He had talked about this before in the strategy class, but why didn't he think of this immediately? Well, if that's the case, the Miao army will definitely come tonight if nothing unexpected happens. They won't come late at night but a little earlier. Since that's the case, we'll just prepare our pockets and wait for them to come. There's no reason for us not to eat this fat meat that's already in our mouth. Yang Qindong had a confident smile on his face. Seeing this scene, Hu Yan and Madame Shui's eyes twinkled like stars. Which girl didn't love heroes? Not to mention people like Yang Qindong who had such a family business at such a young age. Even though they were already his wives, this still couldn't stop them from releasing their love for him. In fact, during this period of time, Hu Yan and Lady Shui had felt something. Why would these elite soldiers listen to her husband's words so obediently? Although they had heard the story of Yang Qindong saving the mercenary leader, they absolutely didn't believe it in their hearts. However, it didn't seem right to say that these people were their husband's soldiers. How old was Yang Qindong? How could he have the time to manage and create all this? Yang Qindong had already noticed this doubt, but he didn't say anything. Firstly, it wasn't the time to say everything. Secondly, he didn't want the two girls to worry. It was better to let them guess as they were now, and it would be easier for him to feel at ease. The 10,000 Miao army, after General Zhang Xing's order, began to slow down their return journey. Those who were able to come out to attack the city naturally had good combat strength. In terms of overall strength, they were the elites of the 80,000 Miao army. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Xing passed down the order in advance. That was, they could slow down and wait for the right time to directly rush into the mercenary camp, which only had 7,000 people, and take over the camp. 10,000 against 7,000, they had a big advantage in terms of military strength. In addition, they didn't encounter any decent resistance along the way. Over time, the arrogance of these soldiers could be imagined. Therefore, even if they were facing the mercenaries, the ignorant were fearless and they had no fear at all. On the contrary, they thought that it was just a simple attack, and by sneaking into the camp, they were afraid that the situation would be decided with a single attack. As Yang Qindong thought, Zhang Xing didn't choose to attack the camp in the middle of the night. Although late at night was the time when a person was in deep sleep, it was also the time when one's defense was the weakest. However, Zhang Xing knew that as long as the mercenary general was not an idiot, he would definitely send someone to secretly observe him. In this way, he would also calculate when he would arrive at the enemy's camp. Since that was the case, how could he not be prepared at all? However, there was no need to be afraid as long as he was prepared. Zhang Xing originally wanted to play the element of surprise. He would wait for the sky to turn dark and suddenly attack the camp. Such a sudden decision would definitely catch these mercenaries off guard. Zhang Xing's plan was very good. However, he didn't know that Yang Qindong had already made preparations. More importantly, he didn't need to put up a strict defense. With the mines placed 500 meters away from the camp, victory was already in his grasp. It was precisely because of these weapons of mass destruction that others did not know or understand that the mercenary camp looked so lazy from the outside. That was why those Miao scouts who were spying on this place believed that this was indeed an unguarded camp. Not to mention other things, with the eyes of these scouts, even if you were tight on the inside and relaxed on the outside, they would still be able to see the general situation. At least when they charged, it shouldn't be a problem for them to kill their way out of the camp. Naturally, the Miao army had heard that the mercenaries had advanced firearms before, but they weren't too afraid. They had seen the firearms of the great Ming dynasty before. As long as they could get close and change to close combat, it would be difficult for any firearms to play their role. If they were able to get their hands on some firearms, then they would have profited greatly. The news from the scouts made Zhang Xing overjoyed. At the same time, he was even more determined to sneak into the camp at night. For this, he had already made preparations. He called all the small leaders who could lead more than 500 people in front of him. Everyone, remember, when you charge in, you must be fast and fierce enough. Don't let the enemy have any time to prepare. I don't mind telling you that there was news that when these mercenaries destroyed the Huang bandits, they obtained a lot of gold and silver. When the time comes, whoever gets the most of these things will naturally get more in the end. Do you understand? Zhang Tseng was afraid that the soldiers below wouldn't use their full strength, so he said this in a misleading manner. However, he didn't know that the faster they charged in, the faster they would die, and the more they charged in, the more they would die. The small leaders below were relatively uninformed. They had almost never heard of Yang Qindong's mercenaries. They only knew that there were a lot of treasures waving at them, and that was enough. Although they had to hand over a certain percentage of the treasures they snatched, wouldn't it mean that the more they snatched, the more they would be able to keep? Although most of them hadn't read books, they still had some understanding of this. After a round of pre-battle mobilization, the entire Miao army of more than 10,000 people became excited. In their eyes, it was as if victory already belonged to them. The only difference was that they could snatch more and gain more. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.